Hello and good morning, everyone. I'm Carrie Pleasance. I'm the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Center for Rights and Research and a member of the Housing and Community Development Forum Planning Committee. On behalf of my fellow committee members and presenting organizations, the Fair Housing Center for Rights and Research, the Home Repair Resource Center, and the Greater Cleveland Reinvestment Coalition, thank you for joining us this morning. Today's event will include a deep dive into mortgage lending in Cuyahoga County and a reflection of the first year of the City of Cleveland's Residents First legislation. The conference will conclude with a session on the rapidly changing federal regulatory environment and housing issues facing Greater Cleveland in the future. Thank you to the Akron-Cleveland Association of Realtors and Third Federal for supporting this conference and our forum series. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items to mention. If you have any questions during your sessions, please use the Q&A feature. Our moderators will pose your questions to our speakers as time allows. We have allocated 2 short breaks during today's event between each session, and the program is being recorded, so we will share the link via email once it's posted to YouTube. Our first presentation will focus on Residents First, the most comprehensive code enforcement reform in City of Cleveland's history. Has it worked as the city administration had hoped? What were the strengths and opportunities with this aggressive approach to code enforcement? Joining us this morning to reflect on this are Sally Martin O'Toole, Director of Building and Housing at the City of Cleveland, Zach Germaniak, Adjunct Professor of Law at Cleveland State University College of Law, Jeanette Wright, President-elect at the Akron-Cleveland Association of Realtors, Nick Downer, Development Advisor at the Morelands Group, and Joe Schilling, Senior Policy and Research Associate at the Urban Institute. First up, Director O'Toole will start us off with providing context to this legislation.
Thank you so much. It's so great to see so many familiar faces here, and I really appreciate all of you taking time out of your day to join us today. I am going to share my screen. If there's any issue with seeing it, please let me know. It should be up on your screen now, so someone let me know if you're not seeing it.
You're good too.
But it's good?
You're good.
Okay, well, here we go. So what you should know first and foremost about Residents First is this took a lot of effort among many people, and it was not done in a silo. So we worked through a collaborative process that took more than 6 months, and we created a dream team of a working group. We had council members, external experts, internal people, so that we could create something that we thought was going to work. So of course we're recognizing some of those names here, but there were really others as well. And one of the things that we sought to do with this effort was to create a rental registration program that was more robust than what we had previously had. We saw some gaps in the way that legislation worked. Essentially, people were just sending $70 checks to register a rental property. We really weren't getting robust information from them, and that led to a difficulty in enforcement. And we all know that things had changed in the market, and we were seeing a lot of out-of-state investors. And so one of the first things that Residents First tried to do was to establish a local agent in charge requirement. And then, of course, overhauling the rental registry, not just with this local agent in charge requirement, but creating additional requirements that I'll talk about shortly. Also creating a vacant property registry, which we have not had, and revamping enforcement with some civil tools, especially civil tickets. And then, of course, just going back through all of the ordinances, which could be all over the place, and trying to make sure that there was clarity and continuity in them so that our enforcement would be more streamlined. So what made us take this step was that we were alarmed by a couple things. And one, VAPAC had published, we had done a property survey in 2022, We compared this with the property survey in 2015, and we saw some changes that were concerning. And also the VAPAC white paper from March of 2022, which showed a rise in real estate investment activity, especially with business buyers of residential properties. And so the first metric is, the decline of A and B graded properties. So with our property survey, we give properties a letter grade of A through F. Obviously, F being the worst property conditions, A being the best. We saw a degradation of property quality, especially around A and B graded properties, which was a concerning metric, and then seeing C graded properties increase from 16 to 37%. And obviously protecting properties from further decline was a high priority. And then over half of all vacant structures in our survey were graded D through F. And so, of course, with investor behavior, and this comes as no surprise, I'm sure, to any of you on the call, on the east side of Cleveland, over half of 1 to 3 family sales went to non-owner occupants in 2021 and 24% on the west side. And this is a trend we see continuing. And so just this sort of aggressive drive up of business buyers and the loss of home ownership, very, very concerning, especially when you think that on the east side of Cleveland, we've seen over 30% of our home ownership disappear. And certainly one other metric that Frank Ford is going to talk about a little bit more later, and he let me borrow his slide here, is the fact that homes owned by investors are more likely to be in disrepair than homes owned by individuals in nonprofit or government ownership. So this is a really startling slide that we should spend some time on. And this comes from the property survey. So the property survey of 2022, and he took those results and then he matched them against property ownership trends to show that investors largely have properties that need repair. So there's perhaps less incentive for them to invest in those properties. Essentially, Frank Ford has done this research comparing our property survey results to the ownership of the property. And I think that is certainly an alarming statistic that I think speaks to the need for what we did with Residents First, in that 62% of investor homes rated C, D, or F as needing repair. So when we dove into what we needed to with Residents First, one of the first things was looking at the rental registry, and obviously finding that with just taking $70 checks and not much other information, we just had very little to work with. And oftentimes ownership would change and we weren't carefully tracking that. And so what we sought to do with Residents First was making sure that all non-owner occupied residential units must be registered with the city and must have a local agent if the property owner does not reside in the area. And so this was a sea change. Now that we have vacant property registry and we have made this more robust rental registry, it eliminates registration loopholes. So oftentimes we were getting significant registration loopholes where people would say things like, well, yes, I own 20 properties, but I'm not renting any of them. They're just all sitting there and I don't have anybody living in them. Well, now they would have to be registered as vacant if that were true. But oftentimes we found that that wasn't true and that people were just skirting the rental registry. The other piece that was very important to us was that in 4 or greater unit buildings, we needed to have assurance that the HVAC units were working. So every winter we have an abundance of no heat calls where people are living in units with space heaters, and then we would see fires as a result of that. And so having HVAC units certified each year along with the rental registration, obviously a very high priority for us in this climate that we live in. And of course, it does grant authority for us to revoke registration for non-compliance, which we felt was very important as well. So how has it worked? And these stats are through December 3rd of 2025. So far, we have taken in 15,073 rental registrations, which is a total of 60,377 units, which represents a 33% increase from 2024. And we've had 5,189 go through the full new process and receive a certificate approving rental occupancy. So that means a total of 29,930 units are associated with what we call a KRO, which is, as we said, a certificate approving rental occupancy. So that means that 50% of units have met the new higher standard in the first year of implementation. And while that might sound underwhelming, this is a very new process, and it did require rental owners to go through a lot more hoops. So making sure that they have their lead safe, making sure that they are tax compliant, that they're either paid in full on their property taxes or they're on a payment plan. So they have to prove that. If they're an LLC, they have to show verification that they're registered with the Ohio Secretary of State. So there's a numerous requirements put on landlords. And so to get to 50% compliance among full registry, we're not disappointed with that result, although we're continuing to enforce and build upon that. And we want to work with people. So we also don't want to be overly punitive. We want to help them comply, especially if there's any confusion. We did find throughout this process that a large number of our local landlords are elderly. And so working with them on how to submit these documents, upload these documents has been a lot of effort on the part of our staff. And we even enlisted a number of people from community development, and they even went out to people's houses to help them register. So we did a full court press to try to help make this as easy as possible for our landlords. Given that, we were putting a lot of burdensome requirements on them. The vacant property registry was another piece of Residents First that requires an annual registration of buildings and identification also of local agent in charge if the owner is living outside of our area. It requires an inspection of the property by Building and Housing for code violations. And then the owner would have to make repairs within 6 months. So it only requires a point of sale inspection for 1 to 3 family and only exterior. So that was not how we proposed Residents First, but that is how it was passed. And also non-residential properties may require a cash bond of between $5,000 to $15,000, depending on the property condition. So how has that worked? So 1,202 buildings have been registered as vacant. We suspect, based on our property survey, that 9,215 may still be, vacant and are not registered. So we've only scratched the surface with that so far. So 483 exterior point of sale inspections have been conducted on 1 to 3 family residential buildings. And so we have started to ramp up enforcement of the vacant building registry. To be honest, we were focusing most of our efforts on the rental registration, which was taking an all hands on deck approach. Vacant property has been recently really ramped up. So we've implemented a new process to issue civil tickets for properties that have been recently boarded for being open to casual entry, which we call OVV, to push owners to be responsible and register the vacant building. And then we are also implementing an AI assisted tool actually this month it launches, and that's going to help us increase monitoring of vacant buildings, and we'll talk a bit about how that's going to work as well. So beginning this month, we will begin using car-mounted cameras that utilize AI technology to collect photos of all parcels from the street in the city to track and monitor property condition over time. So essentially, this is going to provide a full survey of all parcels that will occur every 3 to 4 weeks, which is going to be a game-changing piece of technology. So the system is called City Detect, and how it works is that 2 cameras would be mounted on a city vehicle on either side of it. It takes photos as it drives, going 25 to 35 miles an hour through neighborhoods. It geolocates images, and the car will be very clearly branded as the 311 city support vehicle. It uses software to automatically detect potential property issues from images using computer vision and AI. So it's very accurate. It's quite astonishing. We did a test of it some months ago, and we were quite amazed. And it provides a portal for staff to log in and view images. And then staff would use the images to track parcel condition over time, like the property survey. So every 3 weeks, we can see if something has changed. And then staff would use the images to prioritize work, but not to issue citations. So we want to be very clear about that, because that raises a lot of concerns for a lot of people. And so how it works, and this is a mock-up of what it will look like, although the cameras are very small, but the side-facing cameras attach, and it captures images from the public right-of-way, like the Google car, and it automatically blurs personal information like license plate numbers and faces, and then automatic transfer of the images from the camera to cloud-based software. And again, the car is very well branded, so it's obvious, what's going on there. We're not trying to be sneaky. And so it will detect a wide variety of property conditions, including high grass, collapsing structures, trash, tires, graffiti, boarded windows, damaged street signs, guardrails. It also helps us proactively tackle things like illegal dumping without, forcing residents to have to call all the time, and hence, the 311 city support vehicle. Our residents use 311 to call in those types of complaints. So this is our way of trying to be more proactive about addressing them before people have to call us. So I'll talk about another few aspects of Residents First before I turn it over to Joe Schilling. But one of those was parking garages. And I know that many of you have heard in the news, issues with parking garages, especially in some other cities. We've actually had collapses of parking garages. And so one of the things that we felt was an oversight for us was not having a systematic way to inspect parking garages. And so we modeled it after our existing facade ordinance, which requires taller buildings to have their facades inspected every 5 years. So this is requiring property owners to actually hire someone, a civil engineer, to inspect parking garages every 5 years and have that report submitted to us. If there's an unsafe condition, have a remediation plan in place. And so far, we've had 81 parking garages register since the legislation passed. We had an original estimate of plus or minus 100 parking garages citywide. They're actually kind of hard to track and monitor, and this is allowing us to do that by having this registry. So we identified an initial list of parking garages from land use data, and we sent letters to the owners informing them the requirement. And we certainly have been working on enforcement actions on owners who have not registered. And inspectors are following up to identify parking garages not on our original outreach list. Civil tickets are one of the game-changing pieces in Residents First that has changed our enforcement process. It allows us to issue a $200 fine per infraction. If someone doesn't pay the fine for whatever the infraction is, it can be assessed to the property tax duplicate if it's unpaid, including $50 late fee. And that includes a number of codes in building and housing, zoning, fire, and health. And it's a similar process to the one currently utilized by Public Works to address trash cans being left at the curb, bulk trash being left at the curb. And we have a very informal type appeal process for owners with hardships, and they can appeal within 30 days. And that is done through the attorneys in our Code Enforcement Law Division, and also our Assistant Director works on those appeals as well. So far, we've issued 5,644 civil tickets. The top citations are failure to register rental property, which represents 63% of the civil tickets that we've issued. general property maintenance, failure to obtain lead-safe certification, and failure to register a vacant building. But as stated before, we are just ramping up the vacant building enforcement now. So if an owner receives a civil ticket for a lack of lead-safe certificate, and this is an actual real example of somebody that we took on, and I would have to also say that we are working on tranches of larger parcel owners, people that have large portfolios who have failed to comply. That was one of our earliest efforts to try to address some of them, because there are a number of them. And we find that they have been lack of compliance for many, many years. So here as this example, and we won't name names, but the owner received a civil ticket for lack of a lead-safe certificate. During their appeal process, the owner indicated that they had more properties. We researched that and identified 92 total properties under their control, knowing that only 38 of 92 had a rental registration and only one had a certificate approving rental occupancy. We conducted an enforcement program with civil tickets and violation notice, and the owner now has 81 of 92 properties with a rental registration, 6 with a vacant building registration. We went from 41% compliance with this owner to 95% compliant. So that is a true success. And we started there and we have ramped up from there. So we have identified a number of these individuals and we are just tackling them one after the other. So a final piece of Residents First is the reform of our certificate of disclosure process. This was somewhat confusing because there were different processes for disclosing issues with small parcels versus large parcels. So there were loopholes for disclosing issues. And it was hard to prosecute for failure to disclose. So we merged certificate of disclosure with what we called the statement of authorized use, which was for larger parcels, to minimize those loopholes and capture all parcels transferred, not just larger ones, so that we could provide property condition disclosures and zoning information prior to transfer, to allow for more robust prosecution and fewer things falling through the cracks. And so far, having done that, we have issued 8,583 certificates of disclosure, which is around the same that we did last year. It's a streamlined process, and again, merging the two, the certificate of disclosure with the statement of authorized use to eliminate loopholes. And again, as with vacant building, we're ramping up prosecution for those not complying. But I will say this is part of a new and better approach generally to code enforcement in the city. And like everything that we do, it's iterative. We keep taking different approaches. We keep trying to do things better to drive better results. And one of those, and I know you'll hear more from one of our panelists about this, is we also use civil nuisance action recently to gain control of troubled properties. And we've had great success in the Shaker Square corridor with that. And we have a settlement on one very notorious portfolio where there's a commitment to $20 million of investment in troubled building. And again, with civil tickets being more widely used by us this year, and we continue to increase that, it does provide an off-ramp to the code enforcement process for those with hardships. So an example might be a resident who owner occupies their home, their step unit has collapsed, they've had difficulty with financial hardships. Well, they reach out to us, and then we also try to link them with resources to fix their homes, and a wraparound approach with other city departments like community development to assist that resident, so that instead of putting her in court, we now have linked her with some resources she needs to repair her home. We've also launched what I think has been a very game-changing situation, and that's the Problem Properties Task Force. So we have been having bi-weekly meetings and taking an all-of-government approach for taking on the most difficult properties where it really involves multiple departments. And so we now have an every 2-week docket, and I think it's fast becoming everyone's favorite meeting. because we feel like we're really solving some problems. And we've modeled this after what we have been doing for years, which is called the Senior Initiative Program. So properties owned by seniors, where the city has taken a very active approach with multiple departments to sort of wrap around services and try to address some of those issues. We're doing that also now with problem properties, and it's gone extremely well. But we've also changed the narrative about proactive code enforcement. So we've started doing systematic code enforcement. So doing sweeps of certain corridors, and we're prioritizing those. And I think we continue. We'll try to go east and west and address corridors where we've had a lot of property condition degradation. But instead of hitting people with tickets right away or hitting them with violation notices, we're doing warning tags, which the city has not done in many years. And we found that to be a very effective way to start engaging with residents. So, issuing a warning tag and letting them know, this is a problem and here's a list of resources for you to repair your home. We started to see a real uptick in compliance by taking that action. And in fact, in certain areas, we've seen up to a 40% compliance rate without violation notices, which is great. We've also issued a thank you letter process as well. So we have some cards that we hand out to residents to thank them for taking such a proactive good care of their home, good care of their neighborhood, and also directing them to the 311 if there's any concerns in their neighborhood. And so that does conclude my presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Joe Schilling to bring on the panel. And thank you, and I apologize for the tech issues.
No worries, Sally, but before you go, there were a couple of questions, if we can have you for just a couple of minutes. So one was somewhat technical, which is, how does the AI handle obstructions like trees or snowbanks and things like that?
Right. So this is going to be a very interesting process for us to onboard this AI camera tool in winter, as we're starting it today. And so it learns relatively quickly. And so a lot of the work with the AI process is teaching it what we need it to see and know. So for instance, a gum wrapper is not a debris field, right? And so snow is not a debris field if it's confused, right? So we have to actually show it pictures, teach it, and we do have staff that are going to be working on that. So it's
right. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get things organized and ramped up.
Yes.
And the other question was on the civil citations, knowing that you're issuing these citations for, we'll just say, readily correctable violations. Is there a follow-up, or, to avoid someone, oh, I'll just pay the citation and not do anything?
Yes, there's definitely a follow-up in place for that. So we will continue to revisit those violations, and if they're not corrected, we will continue to issue civil tickets, which we have been doing, or we go to a VN, a violation notice, and then we end up in court with that person.
Right. So it can escalate into another avenue, another remedy. So, I mean, overall, with Residents First, you've got a pretty comprehensive portfolio of strategies. And I guess what you're in this process of doing now is identifying which strategy applies to, certain types of properties, whether it's vacant, rentals, those that are nuisance properties, and keep all of those moving parts aligned and synchronized. And I guess the problem property task force will help you focus a little bit more on the more serious cases.
Right. It's absolutely true. And so it's all part of a whole strategy, and it has been working better than I think we even initially expected it would, and more quickly. And so we're very pleased with it.
That's great. Well, let's go to our panelists and see what their take is on the early days of Residents First. So what I will do in order to save a little bit of time is I will call on each of the panelists to answer this first question. And as you do that, if you guys can briefly introduce yourself and your organization, that will save us a few seconds here and there. So our first question for our panelists is, what are you hearing or seeing on the ground about the impact or the effect of Residents First within its essentially first year of operation, based on the folks that you work in your communities and your clients and constituents? So, Nick, do you want to kick us off? And then we'll go to Jeanette and Zach.
Sure. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Downer. I'm with the Morelands Group, which is a community organizing and advocacy local setup we have here on the east side of Cleveland. We're primarily focused on the historic apartment buildings around Shaker Square. We have about 2,000 units of housing across about 80 buildings, and most of the buildings are around 100 years old. So they're architecturally interesting, they're beautiful, but they are also 100 years old, right? And so they require sort of consistent maintenance. Um, so we do both literal tenant organizing, right? We talk to tenants, and we also sort of have a data analysis and research arm as we've sort of gotten into some of these issues with the sort of overall goal of stabilizing this apartment corridor. So what we've seen sort of in both directions, right? Both from the data and from what we're hearing on the ground, especially since 2020, right, is we've sort of seen this ramping up of investor ownership. It's probably worth noting, apartment buildings are always uniquely sort of like investor owned, right, by their very nature. It's different from example like a duplex, right? And for that reason, they're sort of especially vulnerable, I would say, to what we call extractive ownership, which we sort of broadly define as pursuit of short-term profit over the long-term health of the asset. Right. So you think about taking rents for as long as you can and as much as you can without putting in even the bare minimum maintenance that would be required to keep it up to code. Meaning, do units have heat in the winter, right? Are preventing water leaks? Does the elevator work in a 7-story building? These kinds of things. So we've seen a lot of this activity. And so for that reason, we really were excited about Residents First, and we've been big proponents of it. Because these apartment buildings are uniquely vulnerable to this kind of thing, we really found ourselves dealing with extractive owners with very little recourse to actually make change, right? We were sort of crying out for additional legislation that would help us get our arms around the problem. And I don't want to overstate, that certainly there are many apartment buildings in our corridor where we have stand-up owners doing the right thing, right? They do the maintenance, they vet their tenants, all these things. But for the apartment buildings where there were problems, these problems really spiraled, right? And they really brought down the apartment corridor. There are a couple of specific examples maybe we can get into later. I don't want to soapbox for too long. But I think, really, it was critical that we had some additional tools to figure out sort of like, how do you deal with the problem of extractive ownership and bad owners when you have someone who really is not at all interested in the well-being of the tenants or the neighborhood or the building? What do you do in those cases, right? And so we've been working pretty closely with the city to make sure that the apartments in our focus area have certificates of rental registration now, right? And what we've seen basically on the ground is that the good owners in our footprint, the beneficial owners, most of them are in the process now. About, I think, a quarter, maybe a third of them are fully through the process. There are many more who have started the process. And surprise, surprise, most of the extractive owners have not started the process, right? And so there's been a strategic effort to start with those folks first. People who haven't even, they haven't picked up the phone, they haven't called the city, they haven't started the application process. So from our perspective, it's been really interesting and heartening to see sort of like now we have this civil ticket avenue to sort of get in front of owners who are totally absentee and operating in extractive ways. So we appreciate the legislation. Happy to talk about some specific examples maybe later in the panel. We have some good ones that we could point to. But generally, we're really happy that the legislation exists and we support it in the future.
Well, no, thanks, Nick. So it sounds, based on how you've been able to assess really this difference in ownership, right? And so those owners that you've been able to contact and work with, who seem to be primarily local or have some connections to the region. They're at some point in this process, and certainly there's a number of steps they have to go through, but kind of hearkening back to some of the graphs that Sally showed, I mean, it does seem that within just the last several years, there's been this dramatic or significant increase in the out-of-town owners, and those are still, they're still causing some challenges out there.
Absolutely.
So Jeanette is, a representative and also as a realtor yourself. What are you hearing and seeing on the ground about the effect of residents first?
Joe, let me start by saying I am representing the Akron Cleveland Association of Realtors, and we did have the opportunity to work with Sally and the other groups as this was coming about. Excuse me. So we have had some input, and we are actually very pleased with aspects of the program. We do support the accountability, safe housing, and the strong neighborhoods. As realtors and professionals, however, our challenge is for the local agent in charge, not the concept of the local agent in charge, but the actual business portion of it. That being that the Ohio Revised Code 4735 gives certain it defines who actually should manage properties. And because brokers are basically the licensed agent, if you do something for a fee, unless you're an employee or there's a court requirement for you to do so, or you're the actual owner, then generally it's a broker defined by Ohio Revised Code. And brokers and realtors run into challenges because we're just trying to represent the client through a transaction. And so representing the client through a transaction, signing to be that local agent in charge for someone who does not, who we don't know, we have no real formal relationship with, and having the responsibilities to come back to realtors causes some issues with insurance, just some personal issues with your business itself, because again, we are licensed agents under Division of Commerce. And so that proposes the biggest challenge for us is just really trying to identify how realtors can work in that space, and how brokers who do actual property management, who understand, the corrections of violations and want to make sure that properties are good, in good condition, livable, safe, sanitary, those sort of conditions, how we can keep that going without actually impacting business, because again, there are some insurance liabilities that just can't be covered.
So it sounds like, yeah, there's some tension there with this definition of what is a local agent and the many different roles, right? That, I mean, realtors are often involved in the transaction. And then the question is, once the property is, purchased and sold, if the realtors are involved actually in the property, we'll just say management and supervision. So clarifying what that local agent's, responsibilities are. That at least that's what I'm sort of hearing you say would be really helpful.
Well, we do understand. So yes, we do understand what the responsibilities are. When it goes, however, to being personally responsible, that's where it kind of becomes a little bit more of a challenge, because this again is the business of realtors. This is again the business of brokerages, and brokerages are held to a particular standard by the Division of Commerce. And so if something happens and now the broker is responsible, whether or not their actual errors and omissions insurance or even just their private insurance covers that, is where this becomes a little bit tricky. On the other side of that, it then allows, because this city ordinance doesn't require have the same teeth as the ORC. It then allows anyone to sort of be a property manager. And so that sort of plays kind of across the board in terms of who, the definition of, again, the real estate broker based on ORC and the allowances of. So, there is some tension there. Things we think can be worked out, but that is primarily where we stand with that.
No, no, that's great to hear. So, in terms of the landlords, the realtors going through this process to apply for, the different certificates and registration, how is that going with some of your members?
We've had some members who have found it to be onerous, unfortunately. And also we've had some members whose brokerage has told them that they cannot take that responsibility because again, where does that fall if something was to happen? Whose shoulders does that fall on? And we don't want someone in their professional capacity trying to make a living to now be responsible for something that's completely out of their control. So
Right.
it's provided a few challenges, and we have had some clients who have said that they are unfortunately trying to leave from investing in the city just because of some of the challenges that we face and trying to make sure that we can get this correct.
Got it. And I'm just sort of curious, and this may be on your radar screen. I mean, does the association, I don't know, provide any, I don't know, we'll just say training or assistance with folks trying to file these applications, or is that something you guys have thought about?
So the association specifically does not provide the training. The association is not fully the mechanism. However, we have had Sally and others come and do presentations so that they can talk to the realtors and those in our community about how to get this done and provide the contacts where that professional assistance is better situated.
Got it. Yeah. So great outreach and get
Yes,
people up to speed.
yes.
Okay. Speaking of up to speed, Zach, how's that as the transition for you?
Well,
What are you?
thankfully, well, thankfully, Joe, I have had some time to have the coffee percolate. So yes, I think we'll be all right. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for being a part of this important panel, and particularly to my fellow panelists and also to Director Martin O'Toole. Um, my name is Zach Germanick, and today I am wearing my adjunct professor of law hat at CSU. Briefly have been a housing and urban development attorney under the tutelage of Professors Kermit Lind and former housing court judge Raymond Pianca for the first, I guess, act of my career. I was in-house counsel to Slavic Village development during the years of the immediate aftermath of the foreclosure crisis, and have since moved on into private practice, um, where I represent municipalities, county land banks, really trying to focus on the kind of upper level issues. I think in response to your question, Joe, as a primarily litigator, I see the impact of legislation really up close and personal. The fact of the matter is that, and this might be heretical for some, but I actually represent folks on both sides of the aisle. Among my clients include tenants who are dealing with difficulties, and there are also landlords who are working through changes to a system. I think that what I'm hearing on the ground from both landlords as well as tenants, one is that there actually is a broad understanding that this is, in the grand scheme of things, a positive development. It's kind of like, um, you know, we're right around the new year. Everyone's got a New Year's resolution, to get up and go exercise. Well, those first couple weeks back at the gym are not pleasant. And in some aspects, anytime that you introduce a new environment in, there are going to be growing pains. I will say that by and large, the locally based landlords, i.e., folks who live in Cleveland or a contiguous suburb. One of the most common things I hear is that they are really supportive of efforts to support the local industry. We all have heard stories, and I think Director Martin O'Toole was right to show, to demonstrate the number of out-of-state actors. These are largely speculative owners. I think Nick, in his presentation, used the term extractive ownership. By and large, that class of, we'll call them owners. I hesitate to use the word investor because we can have a separate discussion about what it means to actually invest in something. But in general, there is an understanding of that. By the same token, there's also, and I think this speaks to Ms. Wright's comments, which are extremely well taken, that, at the same time, there is a sense of, well, wait a second, I'm doing everything right. Well, why do these regulations need to apply to me? And, those are legitimate policy points that I think as this program rolls out, I think will be addressed and hopefully refined. The first thing is you have to build the foundation before you can build the roof, before you can paint the house, before you can install the windows, you have to build the foundation. And if we're looking at the results, again, data, facts, this isn't just kind of magical unicorn thinking. We've seen increased rates of registration. We've seen increased rates of voluntary compliance. Those are incredibly positive outcomes. By the same token, I think also what I'm hearing on the ground is yes, there are increased costs of compliance. And in this particular industry, most often, in fact, I would say all the time, those costs of compliance are passed along to the tenant. And so, in a sense, we have an issue now where, okay, we're gathering the data about conditions, but we also, I think now, the other thing that I'm hearing is what can we do with regards to affordability? And that might be separate, but I think if we're talking about residents first, that that is inseparable. The cost of compliance versus the affordability, to actually make sure that people can live safely in decent conditions, but also affordably. So,
Right. So affordability and balancing the costs of this initiative, but also comparing that with the costs of doing nothing, right? Again, in terms of some of the very basic habitability requirements of, I mean, heat, lead-free, those things. We're not talking about luxurious amenities. We're just saying let's make sure there's the basic. But yeah, there's a balance. And I liked your reference as there's a learning curve. So people are starting, there are landlords who, are registering properties, they're doing their lead certification. So they're getting used to this new system, but yeah, there's some tired and aching muscles.
if I may, just one anecdote that I think completely sums up one of my clients, just an incredible elderly woman. She's in her 80s, and when her husband passed away, left her a few properties which she has managed herself for the past 20 years. She is true Cleveland. Swears like a sailor, and I love her as a client, and because she gives me some insights that I probably normally would not get. And just recently, worked through the rental registration process. Computer literacy is not high up on her to-do list, but we went through it, you know, she's without uttering the words that she used, said, "Well, at least this is a way that my properties won't get taken over by some beep 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 from California." So there's an understand there's obviously frustrations, but there's also an acknowledgement that the alternatives are using our neighborhoods as a monopoly board for folks who never have been here, will probably never be here. On the off chance, maybe when the Cavs won the national championship, maybe. But anyways, I just wanted to share that.
No, I appreciate that. And again, some of this process is new to a lot of folks. And so getting used to what is required, and then hopefully as time goes on, you become more familiar with the steps. So let's go like to the second question, which is there a specific topic or issue that you would like to raise about Residents First and its portfolio of programs and policies? And I'm going to focus, or let's start with what can be done with, we'll just say the out-of-town extractive owners, not using the term investors because they're certainly not investing in Cleveland, but yeah, what are the strategies and tools that you think Resident First provides to deal with that class of property owners? Nick, I don't know. What's your impression from
Yeah,
when you
can
were
I
there?
take it and then immediately put Zach on the hot seat?
Oh,
Uh,
okay. I think he's ready.
yeah, I mean, so I think it's really interesting, right? And we occupy an interesting space when you're down sort of like on the ground level, right? Like, we extractive ownership is super toxic, and so obviously we want to minimize that in our neighborhoods. At the same time, we don't want to come across as anti-investment or anti-owner generally, right? Like we try to talk to every owner who will have us really and understand, good, neutral, and extractive. Um, and so I think it really is like a case, I'd like to get into as much as possible, right? Like the discussion around like how do you weigh those things, right? The trade-offs that are really interesting. I think like local agents in charge is a really good example of this. On the one hand, you really need somebody to be responsible, right? To put their name down and be like, look, this is my job to make sure that the tenants in this building have a good place to live, right? And it doesn't need to be the Ritz. I mean, we're not talking about a palace here, but like heat in the winter, right? Like, gotta have it. On the other hand, I sympathize with the other perspective as well a little bit, right? I understand how it could be daunting to put your name down and say, I'm legally culpable for this, right? I would say like perhaps I see the residents first thing, I guess I'll say personally, as sort of like a correction towards a point of sanity. Whereas before there felt like there was no accountability, right? People were pointing fingers, oh, it's the property manager, it's the owner, it's I don't know, who to talk to. I don't In some cases we had tenants who didn't know where to send their rent, right? Like it was total, just absolutely ambiguous.
Chaos.
Um, but I want to pass it to Zach if I could to talk a little bit. I think it's really interesting. One of the things that I've been fascinated to see as somebody sort of involved with this stuff for a little bit now has been sort of like it seems like there's been a little bit of solidification around the concept of like the civil route is the way to get compliance in a way that makes sense and sort of like respects property rights, but also like gets the effects that we're looking for here. So maybe I could kick it to you, Zach.
Sure.
Well, before Zach starts, let me just tee this up a little bit in that, again, I think you painted a great picture, Nick, by saying, there's this particular group of owners. There's been chances to, I mean, get their attention, track them down. So there's a challenge first of who is responsible,
Yeah.
and whether they're saying, oh, well, I'm not, it's my property manager. Property manager says it's not me. So, I mean, that's one of the challenges is just getting the identification of who is responsible. and this accountability, then no one is really stepping up, and the property continues to be in these cases. So, that's where it sort of sounds, Zach, you need to step in with a heavier hammer.
Heavier hammer is such a strong word. I don't know. I don't know if that's the appropriate. But anyways,
A tap on the back.
I think in general, I think bringing civil enforcement into the fold, I think is an incredible win for all involved. And I'm not here to give like a law lecture, but I am gonna like shake the adjunct professor of law hat a little bit and say, okay, let's talk about a few basic legal concepts. All right. And the most fundamental, I think, to our discussions are, okay, property. What is property, right? Well, you have the right to own it, but in our system, all rights, natural rights, come with natural responsibilities. And with regards to the ownership of real property, the right to own is contingent upon the responsibility to maintain. That's pretty basic. I think that, everyone hopefully can agree to that basic foundational principle that has kind of undergirded civilization for a couple thousand years. But, in general, the question then becomes, what is the most appropriate vehicle to ensure that responsibilities are maintained? Um, you know, there are certainly people who object to DUI checkpoints. Okay, you know, that's your perspective. In this particular context, in this particular context, um, what is the most appropriate vehicle to maintain accountability when you have different classes of ownership? We do live in a strange world, to say the least, where we have a few legal fictions. And one of those legal fictions is the concept of corporate personhood. And that's a perhaps a separate debate, but for the present moment, we need to acknowledge that we live in a scheme of ownership where you can own property as an LLC, which is a piece of paper. It's on file down in Columbus, and you can sit on your laptop, and for $99, you can crank out as many people as you want. And when we look at the traditional approach, in my view, of criminal code enforcement, that creates a grossly inequitable outcome because real live human beings who can be arrested, who can be sent to jail, look, I was working with housing court for the first 10 years of my practice. It's really hard to put a set of handcuffs on a piece of paper. You can try your best, but they just keep on slipping out.
Right.
And so
So
it
the
creates,
criminal process does
yeah,
not work, is not effective against corporations.
correct. So with civil, I'm not accusing you as a person, whether or not you're an individual or a corporation. Through the civil approach, I'm saying, hey, this property, this property is out of compliance. I'm not saying that you're guilty of a crime. I'm saying that it's in a sense, you're not putting the person on trial, you're putting the property on trial.
Got
And
it.
that's a fundamental sea change in how you approach code enforcement. Because now instead of and quite candidly, there's also a great procedural element here too, because guess what? If you're charged with a crime under our system, you've got some rights, and those are great. Trust me, I am not arguing against the rights of criminal defendants. I'm actually pro-Constitution. I think it's for better or worse. Individual rights, you got it. But In the context of housing and real property, right? Defendants, including LLCs, enjoy the same constitutional protections as living, breathing human beings, except that again, the disparate impact in enforcement really creates a grossly inequitable outcome. On a civil approach, you eliminate a lot of those inequities. It's actually, in my humble opinion, a much more fair way to address code enforcement issues. And I think that, there's an old saying, I think every first year law student learns it. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And, try as it might, it's really, really hard to build something if all you have is a hammer. You need more tools in the tool belt. And I think that criminal code enforcement certainly has its place. There are certainly, issues where, you do need a criminal prosecution. But that's not every case. And particularly when we're talking about um, this difference between local folks, by and large, the colloquial mom and pop, even if it's organized under mom and pop LLC, more likely than not, they are, they it's not like they're using triple shells
Got
and vehicles to, that's where civil approaches can really, really make a difference because in civil litigation, as opposed to criminal prosecution, we can cut through those layers of LLCs much, much more effectively, shall we say.
got it. Okay, no, thanks for that. So we've got one last question for you to think prospectively. We've only have a few minutes left before we pass it on to Carrie for the next phase of our program. But from your vantage point, again, what would a Residence First 2.0 look like? Is there something very specific that you would fix? Are there some tweaks that need to be made? Um, Jeanette, why don't we start with you? If you were to make a couple of changes for Residence 2.0, what would that look like?
Well, I'd like to say, I would think that part of that the final determination would include engaging a survey of everyone who's involved to kind of find out where they find it working, where they find it not working. To Zach's point, I think ensuring that that realtors and brokers understand or are exempted from any criminal liability that could come forth. That would be a big win for our association and for our industry. So that would be the probably one of the things that we would really like to focus on is just ensuring that there is some exemption from those professional people, again, being the realtors and brokers who are managing these properties or who are, facilitating these transfers, that they have no criminal liability. And
Got
also,
it.
some longer expirations of that, especially around the lead inspections and maybe some visual lead inspections, because we didn't talk about it, but there's some question there about how that lead inspection actually needs to be handled, whether it's based on um, the mayor's choice, excuse me, not the mayor's choice, but the mayor's new implication or how he wants it done for the risk assessments versus a clearance. So just making sure we understand the difference in that as well.
Got it. So trying to clarify some of those, what might be confusion or, yeah, some complexities. Zach, I'm going to go to you, and that allows Nick to think about wrapping us up.
I will keep it very brief. I think in Residence First 2.0, I think two things. One is um, providing more of outreach to both landlords and tenants. I mean, if we're talking residents first, local landlords are residents too. And to create, I guess, a more holistic approach where we're looking at, look, let's work together, to help build up the community. I do want to acknowledge that there are historical and continuing discrimination that prevent predominantly folks of color from, accessing high-level jobs, educational employments. The ownership of rental real estate remains one of the few lawful ways to build generational wealth when you have been denied other opportunities. I think that needs to be acknowledged, and that entrepreneurs of color acting in the rental market, local, should be supported. Two, I think that this presents, now that we're building the foundation, this presents an incredible opportunity for organization, particularly of tenants, particularly in large multifamily properties. Now that are building the foundation, you can now do that higher level of community engagement, community organizing. So those are my two big takeaways.
Got it. Yeah, so more outreach engagement and as they move forward. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, maybe building on some of the themes we've already heard. I mean, I think now that we have the foundation in place of this, something that I think is really interesting to consider is sort of like, I believe Minneapolis has a program similar to this, and one difference from theirs to ours that we should, I think, consider is when there is a good owner situation, right? When somebody is doing right by their building in their neighborhood, which you could measure by metrics of, no code violations or whatever else, right? Perhaps we consider making the renewal, the registration or whatever be 3 years rather than everyone has to go through the process annually. I think, that would be like a clear incentive for good owners, right? Like that's, privileging folks who are doing the right thing and sort of like taking some of the onerous nature of an annual renewal. It would also help with sort of like the processing amount, right? Like the amount of legwork required on building and housing to do, every rental registration every year, right? So maybe there's benefits to both owners and the whole process if we had a situation like that where you have sort of a scale of, it's every 3 years if you're a beneficial owner doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a couple of questions that have popped up mention that. Are there incentives? So getting back to the classic carrots and sticks, are there some positive things that can be done to reward the property owners, the landlords, and the managers who, are doing the right thing? And then, what can be done to build capacity on sort of the civil litigation side and administrative citations and tickets for those who may need just a little nudge in order to correct some easily correctable violations. So, no, this was great. I know there are some additional questions that the audience has posed, and we'll try to answer those in the chat as we proceed through the program. But I would just say that situating residents first compared to other similar initiatives in other cities that I've worked is, there's a lot of other folks within Ohio and beyond that are looking to this residents first model as a way to have this more comprehensive, systematic approach to code enforcement. Because as you all are experiencing firsthand in Cleveland, the housing market is dynamic, it's changing, and you guys have been at the epicenter of foreclosure crisis and now out-of-town investors. So, this is something that's not just going to be confined to Cleveland, but, you're going to see this phenomenon in other cities. So other leaders and folks are looking to see how the residents first effort proceeds in the future. So thank you very much. I will pass it on to Carrie, our host and MC and co-sponsor. Thank you all. Carrie, it's
Well, thank you all for a great discussion. We are going to take a 5-minute break now. So it is 10:23 according to my clock. And so we will be back at 10:28, and I'll announce when we're returning to the program for our next presentation. And welcome back, everyone. Our next presentation and panel discussion will explore mortgage lending. Have financial institutions been supporting underserved communities? What can governments do to ensure lending institutions are serving consumers and their communities? To help answer these questions, we're joined by my colleague Frank Ford, Senior Policy Advisor at the Fair Housing Center, Brad Cromas, the Treasurer of Cuyahoga County, Aaron Miller Tate, Bureau Chief for Community Programming at the City of Cleveland, Kevin Hill, Senior Policy Advisor at the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, and Barbara Anderson, the Chairperson of the Greater Cleveland Reinvestment Coalition. To begin this session, Frank Ford will share some of his recent research on lending practices of financial institutions in Cuyahoga County.
All right, thank you, everyone. I've been doing research on home mortgage lending for over 30 years, started doing it in Colorado, been doing it in Cleveland, Cuyahoga County for the last 9 years. As I note here, some of this analysis is still preliminary, still ongoing. I usually right away want to acknowledge the assistance I've received from Case Western Reserve University. The data comes from the federal government, but Case does add some features to the data, some geographic features that makes it easier for me to do this analysis. Just some quick background. I think the most important thing is that there have been numerous studies that have documented that during the period in the 90s through 2010s, there were many lenders who targeted Black communities for subprime high-cost loans. Not only was that documented in studies, but there have been a number of lawsuits against major lenders where loan officers actually testified and admitted to that. What that led to is tens of thousands of loans going into default and people being foreclosed on, properties going vacant, and then properties becoming blighted. And as you'll see here in the middle of the slide, the east inner suburbs, 1/3 of all homes had at least one foreclosure in the 20-year period 2000 to 2020. And the east side of Cleveland, almost 1/2 of all homes had at least one foreclosure. And this is one of the chief outcomes. If you look at median home sale prices over a 25-year period from 2000 through 2024, the bottom blue line here is the east side of Cleveland. The upper green line is the outer suburbs. Of course, every region of the county did experience some subprime lending and some effects of this, but the east side of Cleveland and the eastern suburbs had the greatest, steepest decline in home sale prices because of the magnitude of the foreclosures, blight, vacancy, and abandonment. I'm just going to skip to the next slide because this is one that I want to focus on. This is narrowing down to just the east side of Cleveland and the west side of Cleveland. And what's interesting to note is as the foreclosure crisis was starting, but it hadn't quite really reached its peak, the east side and Cleveland, east side and west side's median sale prices were really not that far apart. They were at 2005, they were only $9,000 apart. Then you get each of them do have an effect from foreclosure and blight. The east side, of course, had a much more severe effect, and they've both been recovering, which is the good news. But the west side has recovered not only to where it was before, but significantly beyond where it was, to where the median price is $52,000 above its prior peak in 2005. The east side of Cleveland has not recovered to where it was even in 2005 and is still 15,000 underwater. So while there was a $9,000 difference back here at the beginning of the foreclosure crisis, there's now a $76,000 difference in value from the east side and the west side. I'm going to keep moving on. So let me go back one quick second. So if you look at this bottom line, this red line on the east side, there's a couple things this represents. One is it represents a tremendous loss of wealth and equity in the Black community. Second, it represents investors looking at these low sale prices as an opportunity. And third, it has prompted some lenders to not want to make loans. I mean, if you think about it, loan officers are paid by commission. So are they going to want to work on a $50,000 house on the east side? Or are they going to work on a $200,000 house in the outer suburbs and east side, east inner suburbs, west side suburbs, etc. So with regard to investors, this is tracking investor activity from 2004 to 2020. Actually, Sally already had this slide up, but I just want to point out this blue line is the east side of Cleveland, the growth in investor activity in 2020. About 46% of all transactions of homes, 1 to 3 family homes, were acquired by some business entity, not an individual or a family. This is the same slide that Sally showed, showing that investor owners are far more likely to have properties in disrepair, being the orange bars are the C, D, and F rated properties, the green bars are the A and B rated properties, when you compare investor ownership to individuals and to properties owned by nonprofits and government entities. So the low home sale prices attract cash-paying investors, but can homeowners get loans to compete with those investors? And I have this quote from a loan officer: "We don't make loans under 100,000." This is what Cleveland City Councilman Mike Polensek was told in 2022 when he went to a KeyBank branch in his Collinwood neighborhood to inquire about buying a home next door to his. Now, I will make it very clear, I don't believe for 1 minute that this means that the KeyBank board of directors made some edict like, well, we're not going to make loans. And I also don't think for 1 minute that this is the only bank. I think it's just, as I said earlier, it's sort of human nature. If you're getting paid by commission, where are you going to want to spend your time? Are you going to want to spend your time where the median sale price is 50, 60,000 or higher? But it is a problem that needs to be acknowledged. And it means that we have, on one hand, investors paying cash for these properties. On the other hand, we have home buyers trying to get homes that are affordable and they can't get loans. And I want to talk about home repair loans briefly. The same survey that Sally actually referred to, well, actually, there's been a couple surveys in Cleveland of properties, 2015, and the more recent property survey that Sally mentioned. But the one in 2015 found that 70% of the C-rated properties, those were not in terrible condition, but the ones that most need ordinary home repair. They need a new roof, they need something like that. That 70% of those were on the east side of Cleveland. Now, I know that some people might say, well, you know, people in those neighborhoods, they just don't care. They're not interested in maintaining their properties. Not saying anybody particularly on this Zoom is saying that, but I do think it's possible that that sentiment could be expressed. Well, note that over the 10-year period after 2015, the last 10 years, property owners on the east side applied for $231 million in home repair loans. Only 78% of those loan dollars were ever received. The loss of value in the east side over the last 10 years is $179 million. Last thing I want to talk about before we go into lending is, in terms of overall housing trends, loss of home ownership in the 5 regions in the county. And as you can see, the west side, the outer suburbs rather, is the only region that's actually experienced a slight increase over the last 20 years. The greatest decrease, which won't surprise you from everything else I've just said, is 30% loss on the east side, 23% on the east inner suburbs. the two areas with the largest Black population. And I list below my speculation, and I don't know that this is scientifically proved, but I think that there are three factors. One, of course, would be demolition that took place in the East Side and the East Inner suburbs, but also lack of access to home purchase loans, and as I mentioned earlier, investors buying homes for rental. So looking now at lending, and what I've done in the past, and some of you have seen this before, I do an entire 9-year period from 2016 to 20 through 2024. I actually don't have time in the limited time we have here because we want to get to the panel. So I'm just looking at 2024, and this is home purchase lending in traditionally underserved populations, starting with Black borrowers, home purchase loans. Here are the top 15 lenders to Black borrowers in 2024, countywide. And amongst the banks that are bolded, so there's Huntington, PNC, KeyBank, Chase, and US Bank. These are banks that have some type of agreement with either Cuyahoga County or the city of Cleveland, and they're receiving either banking services contracts or they're receiving deposits from the city or the county. Essentially, what is happening is they're holding taxpayer dollars. And Huntington has the highest, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. This is the county slide. We'll get to the city one in just a minute. In the county slide, 137 loans to Black borrowers for Huntington, 40 for PNC. KeyBank is significantly less, so is US Bank. When you look at just the city, sorry, get this together here in a moment. This is just the city of Cleveland. The numbers are obviously smaller. It's a smaller geography. Huntington is 36, PNC is 14, KeyBank is 13, Chase Bank is 9, and US Bank is 6. Now, then shifting from loans to Black borrowers as one underrepresented, underserved population, this is looking at loans to low and moderate income borrowers. Again, this is the county table. Huntington 298, PNC 91, KeyBank 53, US Bank 48, and Chase 30. This is the city of Cleveland only. Huntington 87, PNC 31, KeyBank 14, US Bank 14, and Chase Bank 12. And again, the banks that are in bold black are the banks that either the city or the county is depositing some public funds into. Next, let's see. Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong thing here. Sorry about that. So here's a very positive thing. Local government innovation, leveraging those same taxpayer funds for improved mortgage lending to underserved communities. And the city of Cleveland has the distinction, I believe, of being the first city in the United States to require banks that they are depositing funds with to improve lending to underserved communities. And in the early years of this program, these agreements actually had target lending goals. Now in 2020, Cuyahoga County also deserved credit for being, I'm not 100% sure of this, but I think it's very likely that the county may be the first county government in the United States to look at this same approach. This is a sample of a page from the KeyBank agreement back in 2000. So this is an agreement that was a 4-year agreement, 2000 through 2003. There are two distinguishing features here that are very important. One is that the agreement actually said we're going to target neighborhoods. Most of them are on the east side. There's some on the west side. And also keep in mind that although you see Ohio City here and Tremont, these and Detroit Shoreway, these were not neighborhoods in 2000 that had a median sale price of $200,000. These were neighborhoods that were only slightly higher than the East Side neighborhood. So there's a targeting here of neighborhoods who are underserved. But also notice that in each of the 4 years outlined here, there's very specific numerical goals. Now the numbers here, you have to add 3 zeros. This is not 15,000. That's 15 million in home purchase loans. But the other distinguishing feature is that every year, these lenders were expected, KeyBank in this particular case, were expected to improve. So there was an actual leveraging of the public funds, not only for specific targeted outcomes, but that they would improve over time. The last thing I'll note, and I've got it down here at the bottom, is these agreements back then did not have a provision saying, well, this isn't binding, not enforceable. So I think it's worth anchoring the reality here, and what was done at the beginning was actually very positive. Now, Cleveland also had agreements with 4 other banks, similar agreements. First Star, which is now U.S., Fifth Third, Huntington, First Merit is now also Huntington. And each of these agreements had quantifiable target goals. Here are the current banking contracts with Cuyahoga and Cleveland. And this is just this is not not every provision, but this is my attempt to capture what are some of the key aspects of the agreement. So this is the county agreement. And the county has an agreement with 4 banks, KeyBank, US Bank, Huntington, and PNC. Now, if you reflect back on those numbers I showed you, whether it was loans to black borrowers or loans to low mod, KeyBank was not at the top, but they are at the top in receiving the lion's share of the public funds, 60%. US Bank got 30%. Huntington getting only 5%, yet they were the highest performing bank amongst banks anyway, in terms of loans to underserved populations, 4% for PNC. Were there low mod home purchase goals? Now, the answer is no. For the bottom 3 lenders, there are no provisions for them to improve, nothing being requested. In the case of KeyBank, there is a specific targeted number. It's 330 loans to low mod borrowers over 4 years across 6 counties. Now, the problem with that is this is a leveraging of Cuyahoga County taxpayer funds, not Geauga County, Lake County, and so on. But the 6-county metropolitan statistical area is what is in the KeyBank agreement. So, in fact, those 330 loans done over 4 years over 6 counties would average 13.75 loans per year. Now, I'm going to skip to this column here. Are loans required in Cuyahoga? Well, in the case of where the agreement says we can make our loans anywhere in any 6 counties, the answer has to be no. They can be made in any of the 6. None of them have to be made in Cuyahoga County. Were there any home repair lending goals? No, none. Now, the right side in green is just a reference point for, well, what did these 4 banks do in 2024 with respect to low mod loans? Well, and this is a repeat of what you saw in the earlier table. For example, Huntington was highest at 298, PNC 91, KeyBank was 53, and US Bank 48. And then home repair loans. Now here, KeyBank actually did quite well, 288, but of course it's significantly less than Huntington's 531 and PNC 234, also respectable, US Bank only 75. So well, let's jump to the city. The city's a very similar table. You've got KeyBank, PNC, Huntington, and Chase. So the banks are about the same, but they're a little different. Chase is added here. The dollars awarded, again, KeyBank has the lion's share, 72%, PNC at 19%, Huntington 9%, and Chase has none of the money. But there is an MOU. This is actually interesting. They're not receiving funds. And Aaron, of course, can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but Chase, I think to their credit, at least did enter into an agreement saying we're going to try to do better. But if you look at, are there any low mod home purchase targeted goals? The answer is no. Are there any home repair targeted lending goals? The answer is no. Are any loans required in Cleveland? Well, even though there's no specific goals, the answer is yes. The agreements are not over multiple cities or counties. They are just targeting Cleveland, so that's a good thing. It's not applicable in the sense of PNC and Huntington because there's really nothing that they agreed to, at least in the case of Chase. While there are no specific goals, they are saying we will target Cleveland and we'll try to do better. And again, I have the city of Cleveland numbers, which are just a repeat of what was in the prior table I showed you. My summary notes at the bottom is that it is still a very positive thing that the city of Cleveland was the first local government in the United States to use taxpayer funds to leverage improved lending. The city's current agreements with KeyBank and Chase do target low and moderate income communities in Cleveland, but there are no specific target goals. Thus, taxpayer funds are not, at least not effectively leveraged to achieve improved lending. I'm just going to close with the summary of the challenges that I see. Low home sale prices attract out-of-state investors. Investors purchasing crowd out home buyers. Banks reluctant to make home purchase loans in low price neighborhoods. Homeowners unable to increase the value of their home if they can't get home repair loans. And all of the above undermine homeownership, wealth creation, and the county's greatest assets, its housing stock. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words. I'm trying to go so fast here. There is one more slide, and if I have, Greg, do I have time to do just 30 seconds here, would you say?
Yep, you do. You're fine.
Okay, so I do want to close with this because I think this is important. For decades, housing advocates and public officials have relied upon federal agencies, the Comptroller of the Currency, the Federal Reserve Bank, and then more recently, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, and also HUD, to hold banks and mortgage lenders accountable for meeting credit needs. But in 2025, if you haven't noticed or been reading the news, these agencies have either been decimated in terms of their staff being laid off, or being threatened with removal and had their budgets cut. And that's a huge change. So my final point in this bullet here is that in this new environment that we're living in, it will become increasingly, or it is increasingly important for local governments, county, city, suburbs, to consider how can they leverage their public funds, their deposits, their financial contracts with banks and financial institutions to ensure that underserved credit needs are met. And that's where I'm going to stop. There are a couple more slides. I'm not going to go into them, but this will be posted and you'll be able to get this. So I'm going to call the panel members back up, and I think I'm going to stop screen sharing here. And I guess if we have everybody on board, I'm going to turn it over to Barbara, who is moderating this panel.
Thank you so much, Frank, and thank you especially for that very detailed, specific data that you just shared with us. We'll be getting back to you to talk more about that. Carrie, thank you for acknowledging our panel. And now I'm going to just say who we have on our panel, but I want you to take a few moments and briefly talk about your organization or your program. And we will start, I think we'll start with you, Brad, and then we'll go to Aaron, and then, of course, to Kevin. Okay, we'll start with you, Brad.
Barbara, it's a pleasure to be with you all today. My name is Brad Cromus, and I am the County Treasurer here in Cuyahoga County. Most of our program, as Frank highlighted, as far as the purposes of this conversation, around our financials, we hold about $1 billion in an investment portfolio that we reinvest in order to generate revenue to support county operations. That investment account, we'll get into this, I'm sure, in a little bit, is held primarily through Star Ohio with Huntington. We can talk more about those pieces. In addition to that, we have responsibility, obviously, for property tax collection. So we have a little over $2 billion that flows through in property taxes every year that we collect on behalf of all of the political subdivisions in the county. So we do have a position of importance in terms of leveraging public relationships. One of the things that I have flagged as being a to-do for us as we continue to talk about how we can get banks to do more and more productive lending in traditionally underserved communities is to get our collective municipalities as well as the city of Cleveland and the county to kind of be singing from the same psalm book. So making the same asks of our banking partners, doing that in a coordinated way. I think that's really how we move the needle. Individually, we're kind of a small piece of the pie, even though our assets are somewhat relatively large. in the context of banking, banking balance sheets were really not that significant. So as we kind of leverage our regional relationships, I think that's probably how we improve that. But in any case, that's enough introduction from me, and look forward to talking to you all more.
Thank you. And now, Erin.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me this morning. So I am the Bureau Chief for Community Programming, which, as you can probably tell, is a very different role than treasurer. So on the city side, my role is really more focused on engagement with stakeholders. So think about residents, CDCs, and financial institutions. And those relationships are kind of contextualized for us as a team in financial empowerment as a whole. So while we do work a lot with mortgage bankers and the banking agreements, really our broader interest is in overall financial empowerment. So I don't come from a banking background, so a lot of this is more theoretical than mathematical to me, but it is very much I think there's a lot of room for improvement in the way that we leverage those relationships and leverage our deposits to make a difference for our residents.
Thank you. Thank you. Kevin.
Thanks, Barbara. And yeah, really glad to be on this panel and speaking with all of you this morning. I'm a senior policy advisor with the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. We're a network of more than 700 community-based organizations that are dedicated to creating a nation that not only promises but delivers opportunities for everyone to be able to build wealth and attain a high quality of life. So we work with community leaders, policymakers to really advance solutions like some of the laws that Cleveland and Cuyahoga County have on their books about looking at what public depositories are doing in communities. We work on solutions like that to really build the will to solve our persistent racial and socioeconomic wealth divides, and to really try to work to make a just economy both a local reality and also a national priority. Again, very glad to be here this morning.
Thank you. Thank you. As you can see, we have a wealth of knowledge when we talk about the great representation that we have on the panel today, both locally and nationally. And of course, we have Frank Ford, who serves as the Senior Policy Advisor for and the chairperson of the Greater Cleveland Vacant and Abandoned Property Action Council. So Frank, we're going to kind of put you on the hot seat for just another moment as I ask our panelists whether or not they would have anything that they would like to respond to the information that you just received from Frank this afternoon in his presentation.
Is that a solicitation for feedback from us? Is that what I heard?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, great. So I appreciate that opportunity. I know one of the things Frank went over in the presentation was kind of the impacts of the county's banking agreements and the work that was done on that front. So I just want to add a little color to that. And I want to say, I came into the county.
Oh, we've lost.
Brad, you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted. You muted yourself accidentally.
That's what happens.
We weren't hearing you.
I was referring to notes and then I was holding down a key to, anyway.
Okay.
Technology is wonderful. The point being, I came in toward the tail end of our banking contract review in 2023. But having said that, I know that some of the things that we've pointed to as being positive in that is that we did solicit feedback from community stakeholders. This was the first time that our RFP for banking services actually included specific provisions regarding CRA data and asking banks to deliver on those things. We, engaged a consultant to make sure that we were doing that in a way that was thoughtful. We managed to get our banking partners to provide us with HMDA data in advance of public release dates. We secured some commitments in our contracts that were formal for the first time in a long time. So there were some wins in those agreements. And again, I think I would acknowledge that there's a lot more that we can do and that we're trying to do in our next iteration. The other piece I think that I want to say a little bit about was the the part about banking revenues that are generating from county activities. So our numbers look a little different than Frank's, and I'm not sure if that's because we're including investment portfolio revenues in that. By our numbers, Huntington Bank actually earns the lion's share of revenue from what the county does. By our internal estimate, it's about 500,000 a quarter that they get from managing our investment portfolio pool. And then PNC would be second with about 50,000 a quarter, Key with 21,000 a quarter, and US Bank with about $2,000 a quarter. And that's rough estimates based on the bank's quarterly revenue projection reports and what we know we're holding and what we know from those things. So in any case, that's just a little bit of a different perspective on things, but the bottom line message remains the same, which is that these institutions need to do more, and that we can collectively leverage our pooled assets to do more. And again, as I said before, I think regionalism is the way to get at that. So working with partners to make sure we're making the same masks.
Brad, I do want to get together with you probably after this panel to see your numbers. The numbers that I got for everybody's benefit, I took from County Council's ordinance that was passed in late 2024 that gave the authority to the county executive to enter into the agreements. And those were the specific numbers that council said we approve up to X dollars for Key Bank, up to X dollars for Huntington. So I'm interested to hear about these other numbers, but let's just assume we will have to talk at another time to try to figure that out. And I'm looking forward to talking with you about that because I want to get it right. I don't want to make any mistakes.
Understood, Frank. I appreciate that. Me too.
Yeah.
Well, I think we know that all too well. Want to have the right data, want to have the right information. Okay. Anyone else have a response? Go ahead, Aaron.
I would just add that, the thing that, like, the graphs were probably not surprising to anyone here on this call today, but I think the thing that was really striking to me was the growing separation between whether it's sale prices or mortgages on between the east side suburbs or the east side neighborhoods and the west side neighborhoods, that continues to grow. We like to think that now that we know all of this information about the impact of redlining and how our communities continue to suffer as a result of that, we think we're fixing it. And I think that data makes clear that we are not. And again, I would come back to sort of the larger context of it's not just like housing is a huge piece of this, but there are all of those other social determinants of health, those determinants of work that enable real change are still that we're still lacking.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, great presentation, Frank. I'm curious when you have the breakdown of the lending goal that is in place for Cuyahoga County. I'm curious if you looked at how that kind of compares to the previous performance of KeyBank.
Actually, I'd have to go, well, I could go back because I think I do have that, but I'm wondering if, all right, I'm wondering if it's, let's see, let me see if I can do this quickly here.
Okay.
Just a moment. Can you see that, even though it's not, can you see anything? Let's
Yeah.
start with that.
Yeah, we can
And
see
if I change slides here, are you seeing slides change?
yes.
Okay, then let me quickly go to, I might as well do the slideshow view so it's bigger. Okay, well, got it. Just a moment. All right, so and specifically the county goal you might have been referring to, the only goal, the numerical goal regarding loans that's in the county agreement with KeyBank is the one regarding low mod home purchase lending, which is 330, or it might actually be 335. So I might have a slight error there, over 4 years, over 6 counties. Now, if you go low mod, then over to the second column from the right, KeyBank did in 2024 53 loans, home purchase loans to low mod individuals. So, I mean, I guess what I would say is if I were to suggest to the county and to Brad and Executive Ronayne, well, what might you try to do differently when you have the opportunity? Is to say, okay, if KeyBank did 53 loans in 2024, and we see that a peer bank did approximately 300, 6 times as many, can we try to induce KeyBank over the next 4 years to be increasing that 53 so that the coming year it becomes 100, or the coming year after that becomes 150, similar to what was done in the city agreements back in 20 years ago. So because this 330 over 4 years over 6 counties is just not, doesn't have any real significance. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah.
And I actually have a further thought. Let me say one more thing that occurred to me.
Okay.
I do understand that the county's agreement with KeyBank it's a 4-year agreement. They already signed it. It's 2024 to 2028. I think it ends probably in the fall of 28. So from a strictly legal technical point of view, I don't know that the county has any power or authority to go back to KeyBank and say, hey, we want to change this. We want you to put in targeted goals. That's from a legal perspective. But I'm not sure anything would prevent the county from publicly saying, we've met with housing advocates. We're reevaluating this. We're asking you, KeyBank, are you willing to increase what you're doing? You did 53 in 2024. And will you actually, here's another thing, will you give us the lending you did in 25, even though it won't publicly become available until probably next August or September? Are you willing to even share that data in January or February so we can start thinking about what did you do in 25 compared to this 53 in 24? And what might you be willing to commit to doing in 26? Even if it's not legally required, are you willing to talk to us about increasing that? That's the kind of discussion I would propose. But anyway, Kevin, I kept you waiting long enough.
Well, and I just want to add that
Brad, go ahead.
is one of the things, one of the things in the agreement is that we are supposed to get that data in March. So we are getting that information earlier. That's one of the things that's in our agreement. So just to clarify.
So it's due by March. Will we be receiving it in March? Is that before it's publicly shared with everyone else?
That's right.
Okay, so we will.
I think Brad is right about that. Yeah.
Okay, so you'll get it earlier. Okay.
So in reality, though, I mean that is at a definite improvement. So absolutely a plus that you were able to get that.
Well,
But
I think another thing is would the city and the county, so I'm asking you also, Aaron, and I'm asking Brad, would the city and the county be willing to work with the advocates to analyze the data based on what is going to be shared?
I think we would be fools not to. I think that there is ground level intelligence that folks like you, Barbara, like Frank and Vapek are collecting on a daily basis that I don't know how else I would get it. Like, who else am I going to ask, right? And I think, I say a lot that I'm not a banker. I'm at a point where, my portfolio of things is about a lot of different things. So I am less and less a subject matter expert every day. And I know that there are subject matter experts out there who are passionate and advocating in everything that they do for the residents that we need to be serving. And I think it would be a mistake not to consider your analysis.
The fact that we're sharing, we're serving the same communities.
100%. We are on the same team.
That we would work together. That's how it looks to me.
Couldn't agree more.
since we're agreeing, I'm just gonna push it a little bit more and ask whether we can identify goals for improved lending. In working with this, can we, the city and the county, also identify goals for improved lending for our underserved borrowers and their communities? So it's not just about sharing the data, but it's working together to provide more and better for our underserved communities. So I'll just say communities, period. Yeah.
Frank, before we get into that, would you mind stopping your
Yeah,
share of the
yeah.
screen?
Thank you. I'll do that.
Okay. Okay.
There we go.
Okay. So what do you think about that? Because now we're talking about sharing goals and talking about what best would serve our communities. And I'm hoping that we're going to agree on what best serves our communities.
I think, from my perspective, I think I am much more in a position to say yes or no than I am in a position to say how or by how much.
Okay.
I think that there's a subtlety to that kind of goal setting that is, in some ways, like it's a little bit beyond my capacity as a administrator, right? To really understand. So I think I see absolutely no reason why. And I think too that the idea of goal setting versus looking back on what we did last year, that like I think someone in a housing advocate position is going to be much more willing to push those goals farther, even if they have to come back a little bit in negotiation. You're in a position to push the goal farther than a government partner is, because a
Yeah.
government partner has to kind of be a little neutral and play both sides. And I think counting on the advocates to really push the conversation, and then we can maybe settle somewhere a little closer, but without asking, we don't get.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd agree
And
with
what
that
I'm
very
hoping is
much.
that you see the benefit of working with advocates who
Mhm.
can push at a different level.
Right.
Because I'm thinking about, Frank pointed out that 20 years ago, the city of Cleveland did have agreements with multiple banks, and at least 5 of them did have specific goals for lending. Now, at that time, it was Key Bank, First Star, which is now US Bank, Fifth Third, Huntington, First Merit, which is now Huntington. Will the city of Cleveland return to specific target goals for lending in return for funds put on deposit at the bank? And I guess I'm asking that same question of Brad. Will they come up with specific? I mean, we did it 20 years ago, and I don't know why it dropped to the floor, but can we do that again? Can it work? I mean, can we hold these banks truly accountable for doing the right thing? And in most cases, or in a lot of cases, doing what they said they would do. Brad, I see
Aaron,
you
you want to
nodding your
tackle
head.
that
I'm
one
going to go to
first?
you
No,
first
go
and
ahead.
then come to you, Aaron.
Yeah. I mean, so to answer the question, and speaking a little bit to what Aaron was just suggesting a moment ago in terms of the role advocates can play in the process, I think one of the things that the county did well in our process was having council create a subcommittee that was specifically tasked with asking these questions. And I know Frank's data drove a lot of that conversation, and I think that's why we got the commitments that we did get in the agreement. So I do think that's a path toward doing that. I guess one of the things I would say, and I know Professor Germaniak's still on the call probably, but in the contract space, right, it takes 2 to tangle, and you have to have a meeting of the minds. And so, it's incumbent on us to make the asks and to be assertive about doing so. I do think a little bit about just the regulatory environment we live in general, right? Which is that we are in a deregulatory moment in time. We have an administration that increasingly seems skeptical of CRA and some of the commitments that are made there from a federal law standpoint. So those are headwinds to us being able to do that stuff. Again, and I think we're committed to doing it at the county. I'm looking at our contract again right now just because this has spurred me to do that. We are requiring Key, who is our primary bank, in terms of our daily transactions, to provide an annual presentation to council where they're reporting on their accountability on these things and where we'll have an opportunity to ask, okay, what are you doing in these minority communities? How are the investments looking in LMI tracks? What are you doing for small business in Cuyahoga County? It's not just that statistical area. I know that piece specifically in the contract is there for small business, but we really have consistently been asking them and will continue asking them, what are you doing in our county to help in these communities? So,
And,
we
allowing the
can do that.
advocates to do what we do also.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a collaborative effort, and it has to be.
And I think that the collaboration point is really well taken. I think it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, but it sounds like you have really built some strong internal collaboration to sort of get everyone aligned on the goal, that what this mechanism is supposed to do, and then how we set a goal that works. I don't know that we have that same alignment internally here. I think that they're at the city. I think that there's the legislation, the ordinances that govern this work are sort of buried in the administrative code. The people responsible for it. I said that I have a very different job from Treasurer Cromis, and that is not just in terms of what we do every day, but it's where I sit in the org chart, right? Like, I'm inside a department that's inside a cluster that reports to the mayor versus having the sort of gravitas of someone who either is the CFO or works closely with the mayor, who's going to get the attention of a regional bank president. I am much more likely to get the attention of a local CD, community development banker who wants to do things in the community but they don't have the same control over lending that a regional president would have. So I think some of it is structural in the way that our ordinances are structured, but I think that if we could get a little bit more internally aligned around some of those goals, I think we could do more.
I understand. Kevin, let me ask you, you heard Frank talk about the weakening of the federal oversight of banks. That once what would have been there, that would have been maybe holding some of the banks accountable, are no longer there. Do you think local government can or should play a stronger role in light of this? I mean, how do we still do this, get the job done, if the federal government is no longer as strong as it should or needs to be?
Yeah, great question. I think absolutely, county and city governments should be stepping up in this moment. We are seeing, we're at risk of seeing the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau just outright disappear. It's already been effectively gutted. You're seeing, reconsideration of what is discrimination, moving against things like disparate impact. You're seeing even finalized settlements done previously being revoked, some of which were very egregious. So I think it's absolutely it behooves city and local governments to be doing more. Good news is I have heard some good things about the Cuyahoga County Scam Squad. But I think to kind of Erin's point earlier about how these codes and regulations on the books get so buried, I do think one of the key things is and one of the kind of low-hanging fruits is just to be doing much more public education about what resources are there in your local government already. I think the people that the companies out there that want to prey on constituents and neighborhood residents, they're very familiar with what they can get away with and what's like right up to the line and what people don't know. But unfortunately, a lot of people in their neighborhoods are not aware of, the rights they have and the abilities they have to raise issues. I think, here at NCRC, what we've recently done is added fair lending complaint form to our website, kind of modeled off of what the CFPB has. I've seen something similar on Cuyahoga County's consumer affairs site. Cleveland, I'm not sure if they have something just easily available for people to raise maybe lender issues that they're having. Another thing that I would really encourage all city and county governments to look into right now is to really be really intentional of launching a process, a community-driven process to really determine what are the specific housing and community development needs. Some of this is going to be obvious, and you hear in Frank's presentation the need for smaller dollar mortgages. But I think, I don't think the current federal regulatory environment has a long shelf life. Call me an optimist, but I do think at some point where, the pendulum's going to swing back, and there's going to be a lot of look back at what was going on right now. And I think if, the city and county had a report informed by a lot of public input on these are the things that will be most responsive to the local needs here. I do think that when we get into a more I'm trying to think of the right word, a more usual regulatory environment, to put it lightly. I think that the CRA examiners going out to examine what banks are doing in Cleveland, they will take that very seriously. There's guidance that directs them to look at, city initiatives, city programs of community development when they determine the performance context of banks, and to really evaluate what are they doing in those areas that really is most responsive. So I think those are the things I would kind of recommend is first and foremost, let people know what's available, hopefully increase your resources available to helping people navigate the enforcement opportunities that are already there at the state and county level, or city and county level. And then also start, really community-led, involved processes of really ascertaining these are the very specific things that we need banks to be strongly looking at in order to really be responsive to our local needs.
Thank you. Thank you. Frank, do you have any comments from what you've heard?
Yeah, I just have one thing. I really appreciated when Brad pointed out that the county council had a subcommittee that was monitoring the previous Key Bank contract in the previous 4 years. That I agree, that was a very positive thing that the county did. There were 8, 9 people plus Cheryl Stevens, who was council member who chaired that. And it's not just that they brought to that effort, those 8 or 9 people brought experience that they had in housing, but they actually, in spending 3 to 4 years every month looking at this, they gained tremendous knowledge amongst themselves. That group has not yet been reconvened. The group has asked Council President Miller if he would consider that. He said he is considering it. And I guess I'm hopeful that that group will get reconvened in 26 because they really developed a lot of expertise. It would be shame to lose that. And
have the opportunity to share and network that information, and we would really like to continue with that and hope that that does happen quickly. We're looking for somewhere close to the beginning of the year so that we can resume those efforts and help them to benefit the community, because that's what we're all working towards, is making sure that the community is served. And I recognize that and I appreciate that. Did anyone else have something that they just saw their heart that says, I got to get this said before we leave? Okay.
One thing.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, yeah, I'll be quick. So I mean, I'm glad to see that the county has some goal setting and encourage Cleveland to do as much as they can there, because I think goal setting just really is, you have to have some way of measuring success. Banks are going to tell you, any bank's going to say, like, we're out there for more mortgage lending. We're doing our best to serve underserved communities. Like, that's just part of their marketing materials. But we need to have some way of really evaluating, at the end of the year, how are we determining that? And I think we'd be naive to think that most banks don't have internal goals that they're establishing for their lending officers and things like that. And I think progress towards established reasonable goals, it really helps banks understand if their products, their loan officers, their marketing strategies are really helping them expand access to homeownership, which benefits them. We're not asked, loans are not handouts. Loans are things that the banks will make money on. And just one last quick point is, it's not just how do you reach, or it's not just the number. It's also, I think, how do you reach this number? And so like looking at things like, is your underwriting factoring in rental history and utility, which is bipartisan, supported by the current administration. And also, looking at, Frank alluded to some of this earlier, like really look at the payment structures for loan officers. If your loan officer is being paid on commission, it's a natural disincentive for them to want to work with lower value homes. So just, looking at the not just the number, but how the ways that we get to the number. And I think housing advocates there will be very successful at, kind of guiding these are the things that'll help expand your client bases for the banks out there.
Thank you.
I think actually, honestly, a lot of what I was going to say is I think Kevin just said better than I could have. I think, Frank, earlier you said that it's unlikely the Keys board of directors sat down and said, we're not going to make these small dollar loans. What I think Kevin is referring to, and the way that I tend to think about it, is like it's a cultural change in banking. It's like, we know that every banker that I talk to says, well, our underwriting team can be flexible. I don't get the feeling that underwriting teams know that they can be flexible. And so how do we make that more of a standard, make that more of a culture, even if it's just a local push to do that? How do we help the banks understand where their flexibility is? The other thing that I've learned about CRA and banks is that everything they do is so motivated by risk and aversion to risk. And so as a municipality, what can we do to help mitigate risk? So maybe it's not just about the example that Kevin gave about thinking about rental payment history and making it clear that it's a less risky proposition than you may have thought. There are other things that we can do to support individual residents in their search for these loan products that may help to mitigate that risk too.
Thank you. I'm looking at two questions, and this is something we're going to have to think about because we certainly don't have the time to answer them. But excellent questions. And one of them was, is full CRA credit given to the bank if they don't initiate the loan? What are the penalties? We need to look at that. And also another excellent question, since the majority of home loans are made by mortgage companies, what type of monitoring is being done on those loans? So as we continue, I know you, I see Kevin, are you waving to me?
I can answer that really quickly.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so full CRA credit is given whether the loan is originated by the bank or purchased by the bank. It's something that NCRC that we've kind of been trying to improve. There are some benefits out there for loan purchases, particularly of like CDFIs or minority ran depository institutions. But we do think that the just giving credit for everything approach of purchases is not great. And there's a lot of stories out there of banks, purchasing loans around exam time to pass. So it's an area where the CRA can be improved. And the second question about mortgage companies, that is right. I don't have the specific state numbers in front of me, but in a lot of states, the main industry is mortgage companies. And Frank Ford slides I think you saw a lot of mortgage companies on there. Those are not covered by federal CRA. They are covered by the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, though, so they do have to report out, who's applying, are they granting, and stuff like that. We have seen several states enact their own CRA laws. That's something that I personally do a lot of work on at NCRC. Their state CRA laws will apply to mortgage companies since they are state licensed. Um, I would love to talk to people about doing that in Ohio, although I do think the current Ohio legislature would make that a bit challenging. But sometimes we have to fight those challenging fights. But yeah, basically, I can put my email address in the chat if someone wants to talk to me more about that or anything related to federal or state CRA. I'm happy to talk with you anytime.
We'll share that information. I thank you so very much for an excellent, robust discussion. I think we hit a lot of topics, cleared up some things, certainly made some more partnerships and networking, and we will definitely continue along those lines. And so now I have the pleasure of turning it back over to Carrie. It's back to you, Carrie. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you all for a great session. We are now going to take another 5-minute break. So we will be back here at it'll be 11:34. And I'll announce when we're returning to the program. And welcome back, everyone. It is my pleasure now to introduce Dennis Keating, who will be introducing today's keynote speaker and serve as the moderator for the question and answer following the keynote presentation.
Thank you, Carrie. And it's my pleasure to introduce my good friend, Alan Mallach. We're lucky to have him here today to talk more about national issues and trends related to housing and urban development. And as I'm sure the audience knows, quite a bit of turbulence at the level of federal policy for housing and community development. I'm going to briefly give you Alan's background. Happily, he knows Cleveland. He's been there and talked about Cleveland, written about Cleveland in the past. But to allow him maximum time, I'm not going to go through his entire massive CV. He has a degree from Yale and served his past as the director of the Trenton, New Jersey Department of Housing and Urban Development. Since that time, he's been a consultant, written widely about housing and community development issues, and a few of his affiliations currently include the Center for Community Progress and the Brookings Institution, focusing on issues related to particularly older cities. He also has taught, including at the Pratt Institute in New York City, architecture department at Rutgers University. He's also worked with the Lincoln Institute of Land Use Policy and the Federal Reserve Bank in Philadelphia. Among his many, many writings, two fairly recent books. First, The Divided City, back in the teens, but then more recently, The Changing American Neighborhood. He also blogs at Pleasant and at Shelterforce. He's written many, many, many articles as well as many research reports. So if you're looking for a definitive informed voice about issues related to housing vacancies, neighborhoods, redevelopment in cities, particularly older cities like Cleveland, Alan is both available, very knowledgeable, and I'm looking forward to hear what he's going to talk about to us today. I'm going to now turn it over to Alan. You can put your questions in the chat in the question and answer buttons, and we'll address as many of those as possible when Alan has finished his initial talk. So without further ado, Alan Mallach.
Thank you, Dennis. And we're in a tough point in the world today. And actually, I don't really think I want to talk so much about the problems we're facing, but to look at the whole area of community development and take a step back from some of the issues and the immediate challenges that we've been facing. And basically, let's start by thinking of neighborhoods as an ecosystem, where the goal of a good neighborhood is a place where people thrive. And if you think about it in those terms, what does community development mean? And I think of community development as a process of building a stronger neighborhood ecosystem. And that includes a lot of different things. It includes housing, but it also includes a lot more. But it's all focused on what can make the neighborhood and the people who live there a stronger, better place. So I'm going to start talking about housing, but then I'm going to go on into some other stuff. And depending on how many minutes I have left, I'll try to maybe connect that to the national scene today, which is frankly very depressing, not much fun to talk about. So I think when we look at a neighborhood, we're not expecting overnight change, but we need to focus on how do you gradually make a neighborhood stronger? And what does housing mean in that context? What does housing mean in a city which is losing population? In a city where there are still, despite all the demolitions, more housing units than people need. So it's a question of what housing makes the neighborhood a better place, not just is it an improvement in housing conditions for one family or 10 families, but is it also strengthening the neighborhood? So the first thing I'd like to mention along those lines is the need to focus on home repair. Cleveland is losing thousands of salvageable older units. As some of the earlier speakers have shown, a significant part, probably close to a majority, of the housing units in Cleveland during these parcel surveys are ranked C or worse, which means there are huge numbers of houses that are in need of repair. This includes obviously lots of rental properties, but it includes also lots of owner-occupied properties, particularly older and lower income homeowners. And in the meantime, since if we don't focus on this, what happens is homes deteriorate to the point where they're abandoned, then they become vacant properties, and then they have to be dealt with in a completely different way. And interestingly, Cleveland has a pretty good track record in addressing vacant properties. And VAPAC has been working for 20 years to deal with that. But I think the key thing is we have to, what they say, move upstream. Catch the properties before they reach the point that they're abandoned. And I would suggest maybe what Cleveland could use would be something like a HRPAC, Home Repair Property Action Committee, where everybody gets together. There's no systematic focus on repairing properties, keeping them from getting abandoned, keeping older homeowners in their homes, dealing with landlords, supporting landlords, actually, responsible landlords to make their properties safe and healthy. I think the residents first approach provides a really good hook to start focusing on that. So I would put that as one of the top priorities to think about. A second one is, and again, the previous speakers have really made this point. Cleveland is eroding homeownership. Cleveland has lost, since 2000, Cleveland has lost almost 25,000 homeowners. Now, that is a terrible problem, and it symbolizes some very serious structural issues in whether it has to do with mortgage lending, whether it has to do with outmigration, whether it has to do with incomes. I mean, there are lots of issues going on here, but that kind of erosion of homeownership works to undermine neighborhood ecosystems. There's nothing wrong with a certain amount of rental housing, but a strong neighborhood needs a solid foundation of homeownership, and a lot of Cleveland neighborhoods are losing that. So that is the second one. The third one I would say is a little fuzzier, but I think of it as healing the neighborhood fabric. There are a lot of neighborhoods in Cleveland with vacant lots. According to something I heard, I don't know if this is accurate, there are 25,000, give or take, vacant lots in the city of Cleveland. A lot of neighborhoods, you have perfectly decent houses interspersed with lots. A lot here, 2 lots there, 3 lots there, so forth. So figuring out where those areas are, where a relatively small number of new houses can be developed as infill homes, to build home ownership, to take a street that now looks like a gap-toothed street and fill in the gaps. That's potentially an important strategy in a lot of the city's neighborhoods. So what I suggest in terms of looking at housing, look at home repair, look at infill, look at building home ownership, and be strategic. Focus resources to where they can have an impact and make stronger blocks, and from stronger blocks, build stronger neighborhoods. And that is more important, in my opinion, in the city than building what you might, let's say, LIHTC projects. There are probably appropriate places where a LIHTC project can enhance a neighborhood and make that neighborhood stronger, but it's not inherently so. And where it isn't, I'm not sure that project adds value overall to the community where it's located. So housing is critical, but it's not just about housing. And are the neighborhood problems in Cleveland fundamentally housing problems? I would suggest perhaps not. Perhaps housing, while it is certainly it's a problem, is much more a symptom of other problems that Cleveland needs to deal with than the crux of the problem itself. I'd like to shift gears for a minute and talk about some of the other problems because they're economic, they're demographic, they're social, and they're also racial. So at this point, I'd like to throw out a few statistics that I found fairly easily. First one, the number, Cleveland is losing population gradually, but there are certain areas that are dropping far faster than the overall decline. First, the number of children in Cleveland is dropping. In 2000, 7,000 first graders entered the Cleveland public schools. Last year, it was 2,400, barely 1/3 as many. And as the size of age cohorts get smaller and smaller, that means in the future, Cleveland's population is likely to decline faster. Okay, another one. Cleveland had about 25,000 married couples with children. Today, it has less than 10,000. Only 1 out of 13 households in the city of Cleveland is a married couple raising children. Less than 1 out of 5 households in Cleveland have any children under any circumstances. Now, okay, there's nothing wrong with not having children. But if a city sees that kind of erosion in that population, that destabilizes the community. Married couples raising children are, in many respects, the backbone of a neighborhood. They are stable in the sense that they tend much more to be long-term residents. They have much more stable economic pictures because usually we're talking about 2-wage earners. They tend to be more engaged in the community. And there's evidence that the outcomes for their children are better. And Cleveland is seeing that population disappear. That is a problem. Another thing In 2000, there were 178,000 people in Cleveland who had jobs, who worked. They worked somewhere, but they had a job. Today, it's 133,000, down by 45,000 people since 2002, as it happens. Okay. Again, there are fewer and fewer people in Cleveland who have jobs. According to the census, if you look at the group of young men aged 16 to 29, they have a collective unemployment rate of 18%. If you look at who's working in the city of Cleveland, again, go back to 2002, 83,000 of the people who lived in Cleveland and had jobs were working in Cleveland. Today, it's only 50,000. 4 out of 5 of the people who work in Cleveland commute from outside the city to work. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Cleveland has a strong job base, and quite remarkably, compared to a lot of other cities, has maintained a stable job base over the ups and downs of the last couple of decades. It hasn't grown, but it hasn't shrunk either. But the number of people in Cleveland who participate in that job base and in that economy has shrunk by almost 40% during that period. I don't know whether that's because people leave the city, people lose their jobs, or what, but it's a problem, and it's a very low percentage compared to most other similar cities. So, two last statistics. First, everybody knows Cleveland has a poverty rate over 30%. And one last statistic, in 2000, the median Black family had an income which was 67% of the median white family. Okay, that is not great, but it's something. Today, it's 54%, which is far worse. So if you look at all of these figures, the question is, what does this mean for, not for the city generally, but for the city's neighborhoods? And I go back to what makes a healthy neighborhood ecosystem. And again, yes, people need a decent house to live in. They need to be able to live in a neighborhood which is reasonably safe, reasonably clean, and hopefully not terribly unattractive, and has decent amenities like parks and playgrounds. But even more, or at least as much, they need to have the opportunity to get a decent job and make a decent living. And I would suggest that that is a critical part of a CDC's mission. Now, not all CDCs are going to be providing workforce development or education, but I think this is something that needs to be engaged with. Now, we're talking about a lot of things: schools, workforce training, infrastructure, vacant lot maintenance, code enforcement. You know, many years ago, and I'm sure probably some of the people listening are familiar with this, Cleveland had a very formal code enforcement partnership with a whole lot of CDCs. Some cases it worked really well, some cases maybe not quite so well. But it was an effective way of engaging the CDCs as a kind of a force multiplier for city government in improving the quality of properties in their neighborhoods. Now that the city has reinvigorated the code enforcement and the rental registration process, maybe it's time to reopen something like that. But let me look for a few minutes at the workforce training area, because I think that's a critically important one, and one where, in all likelihood, some CDCs may be involved in it directly, some CDCs may be supporting activities by others, and some CDCs may be not involved at all. But it is a critical piece because it really provides, or should provide, the glue that connects people to success in the job market. And what we know is that a huge percentage of people in Cleveland fall into three categories. They're outside the labor force entirely. They're unemployed and haven't been able to find decent work, or they're stuck in a low-wage, dead-end job that isn't providing enough for them to support themselves. And this is where the workforce system becomes critically important, because it should provide the launching pad from which all of those people can find decent employment and opportunity. Now, I haven't analyzed the Cleveland workforce development system, so I'm not going to say anything about it. I'm going to talk generalities. But I've spent a lot of time looking at workforce systems in a lot of cities. And I would say there's one general rule that applies to most workforce systems in most cities. They don't work, period. They aren't doing the job. At the same time, here and there are programs that are making an incredible difference in large numbers of people's lives. And so some years ago, and I write about this quite a bit in my book, The Divided City. Some years ago, I started going around places, talking to people, saying, what makes a difference? Why are some people successful and most people are not? Well, what I found was the first thing we learned is that job skills are only one part, or the lack of job skills are only one part, and often not the most important part of what's keeping people from succeeding in the workforce. And there are lots of other issues. There are behavioral issues. There are legal impediments, judgments, convictions that could be expunged under the right circumstances. Economic problems, family problems. There are lots of other issues that get in the way of people succeeding in the workforce. And the programs that succeed are the ones that don't just address the job skills, but address all the other issues. And they do one more thing. There's a program, I really like this. This program has developed very close relationships with employers, and they target their training to the needs of employers in their city, which is, of course, fundamental. But they know that an awful lot of people, once they finish their training and they go off into the workforce, something goes wrong. They get into a fight with somebody. They don't understand something. The employer doesn't like them for some reason, doesn't like what the clothes they're wearing or something. Well, what this program did, I thought was very ingenious. Every person, after they finished the training, was assigned a coach to spend the next 2 years keeping track, basically, of that person's relationship, workforce situation. And so if something came up, the coach would come in, maybe sit down with the worker and the coworker who got the problem, or the employer, so forth, and work it out and keep people from losing their jobs, basically. So the point I'm trying to make with this is that there are ways to succeed, and that there are ways that CDCs can engage with this system to try to improve the living conditions of the people who live in their neighborhood, and by extension, help build a stronger neighborhood level ecosystem. So I think that's my main point, that take a step back and you start to say, what are the problems in my neighborhood? What are the needs of my neighborhood? What do people need? And then start to figure out, how can I, as a neighborhood-based organization, start addressing those needs and start making the change that people need. It's difficult, but I think it's absolutely critical to be thinking in those terms. So with that, let me segue to the national picture, because we're in a really difficult time. Resources are going to be less readily available. The sort of regulatory environment that we've sort of relied on, like CRA, for example, is going to be weaker. But I think the one thing we can hope for and plan for is, first, that's not going to be forever. That the pendulum, as somebody said earlier today, the pendulum will swing. And that whether large amounts of resources will ever come back is a question mark, though. I think there will be future federal governments, maybe even state governments, that will be more supportive of the kind of work that community development people do in Cleveland and other cities. But I think the biggest problem that we're going to have in the future is that, given, I think, a series of factors. Number one, neither party seems to be willing to raise taxes to the levels where significant new resources for activities, programs of any kind are likely to be available in the foreseeable future. That, I think, is, to me, is almost a given. I think it's unfortunate, but I think it's a reality. Secondly, we have got ourselves into an extraordinary fiscal bind in this country. We're spending huge amounts of money on debt service, defense, Social Security, and Medicare. And when you take those off the top, and they're going to get bigger and bigger because our population is aging and our debt keeps growing, there's not going to be much left for other stuff. So I think what we, as community development people, need to be focusing on, we can expect that the regulatory climate may shift back, that policies, more positive policies, whether it have to do with mortgage lending or housing or anything else, will be back. But we cannot anticipate that major resources are going to be coming back. And that means we are going to have to focus on what we can do with what we have. And this goes back to, let me say, like workforce. Can we afford to spend millions of dollars on duplicative programs or programs that lack the supportive services and the holistic approach to actually get significant results? I don't think so. I think we owe it to our communities to start becoming much more rigorous about how we spend the money that we do have, to make sure that it actually improves the lives of people in our communities, and that we focus on being concrete about getting results and about focusing on people. I think the residents first concept, whether it's applied to code enforcement or workforce development or education or policing or any of that sort, is what we really have to focus on. How do we make our city work better with the resources that we have, and not spend time looking for resources that aren't going to show up? So I think this is not an easy time to be a community development professional, to work in this field. But it's an incredibly important time, and it's a time of great opportunity, because I think we know a lot about what works and what can make a difference in people's lives and in neighborhoods. So what we have to do is start applying it and thinking holistically about our neighborhoods and thinking about our organizations as organizations dedicated to changing neighborhood ecosystems. And if we do that, I think we can succeed. Thank you. Dennis?
I'm going to ask a few follow-up questions of Alan, and then we'll get
By the way,
to.
can you move your camera so we can see all of you? Yeah, there we go.
I just lost my picture here.
Did we just lose Dennis?
I think Dennis logged off.
Just answer a question. Make a question.
I don't have any. There's nothing new in the Q&A box. I don't see anything in the chat.
So I have a question for you, Alan.
Okay.
You talked about CDCs as organizations dedicated to strengthening their neighborhood ecosystems. Where would you start? Knowing that, of course, neighborhoods are at different stages in this journey, but yeah, where would you recommend people start?
Did you get my question?
Yeah, Joe just posed me a question. I don't know if the other people could hear it, but the question was, if the goal is to change the neighborhood ecosystem, where would you start? I think that's a good question. I don't think there's any one answer. I think you really have to look at the neighborhood. And I think it's really important for organizations to really analyze what is going on in your neighborhood. And there's lots of data available between what the census and NEO can do. And I thought this amazing thing that Sally was talking about this morning about tracking property conditions with a camera that runs around the city. So there's an amazing amount of data. So the question is, what is going on in your neighborhood? And also look socially and economically. The census has a website where you can draw your neighborhood boundaries and then find out enormous details about how many people in that neighborhood work, at what wage levels, in what categories, what age groups, and so forth, and how many jobs are in that neighborhood, ditto. And you can actually draw the neighborhood boundaries on their map. So there's incredible data. So the first thing is learn your neighborhood. Who are your landlords? Who are your homeowners? For example, some neighborhoods you'll discover that almost all the homeowners are 60 years or older or 70. And that becomes a whole critical issue to look at, very different than if you have young homeowners. So the first thing is to really understand the neighborhood and understand the housing conditions, but also the economic and demographic dynamics of the neighborhood. And then start to ask yourself, where can I intervene most effectively? Where are the problems that are both serious, but at least at some level potentially manageable? It might be code enforcement, maybe working with the city to get a really focus on problem landlords. Home repair might be another one. If there are a lot of older homeowners with houses that are in poor condition, because that not only addresses the need of that family, because if that house is in poor condition when the homeowner passes or moves away, the odds are home buyers aren't going to give it a second look, and it'll end up going to an investor. So you really have to target it around what the specific conditions of the neighborhood are, but then to find within that picture areas where intervention is possible without huge amounts of resources and reinventing the wheel. So there's no specific one answer though for cuts across neighborhoods. And again, one other thing, I think it's important to target. If you can create, if you have the resources to say bring in 10 really nice new modular houses and put them on vacant lots, you put one on each of 10 blocks or 10 on one block. Better the latter. So here's a question I see in the chat. Your thoughts on the possibilities of new models of property ownership, particularly regarding co-ownership models and land trusts. I don't know, maybe Dennis, you should be the one reading the questions. I don't know how.
Go ahead.
Yeah. It's interesting. First, I don't think there are any magic bullets in housing. I don't think you get any, special impacts by having different ownership models. At the same time, I think some of them can be useful. I think one thing is having things that are basically in between sort of plain vanilla rental and plain vanilla home ownership that actually can benefit, that work for people. Like, co-ops, interestingly, in the United States, in New York, everybody thinks of co-ops as a very normal way of living. A couple of other cities in the country have a fair number of co-ops. Otherwise, they're rare. But at the same time, it actually makes for a quite decent model for where people can have relatively low cost of entry and an involvement in the property that increases their stability. Land trusts, I think, are interesting, but I get very frustrated when people talk to me about how somehow land trusts can create an almost magical path to affordability. Land trusts can be a good vehicle for maintaining long-term community ownership of affordable housing and community assets. I think that's important. But it's important to also bear in mind that land trusts don't change any of the basic laws of economics. A house still costs what it costs, and so forth. So I think they're worth considering, especially the problem, of course, is if you try to create a land trust in a neighborhood where housing prices are rising, then it becomes an extraordinarily expensive proposition. So I think what could be a very interesting approach in some neighborhoods in Cleveland, where you are doing infill, is to have, since there are lots of inexpensive vacant lots, or free conceivably, is to organize a land trust around the infill housing development opportunities. I think that might create a vehicle because after all, if you do stabilize the neighborhood and make it a better place to live, there's always a possibility that house prices will go up. And in that case, having an inventory of homes, where we're talking about home ownership or rental, that are essentially price stabilized as some level of affordable housing, becomes a huge neighborhood asset.
Let me go back, Alan, to home repairs, particularly the problem of older homeowners in older housing. We have a very strong county land bank here, which has done tremendous demolition and some new housing. But since we have more land banks around the country, you see a perhaps a role for them in providing more help in terms of home repairs for given the lack of money that cities have, although Cleveland has increased its budget for home repairs.
Yes. And I think, okay, home repairs is an issue at a lot of levels. First thing, there's clearly not remotely enough money going into home repairs relative to the needs. And clearly we need more money, and that's going to be hard to come by, especially grant money. I think certainly it's important to look at, I thought, Frank's statistic where he talked about the sheer amount of loan requests, loan applications for home repair loans on the east side that for one reason or another were denied, and what an impact that had. I mean, it says if people are applying for loans to repair their houses, we ought to have a program that can enable them to get their loans. Now, I'm sure in all likelihood, a lot of those people didn't meet whatever qualifications the bank has to give a home repair loan, or the house did not have enough equity to support the loan as a lien, or I'm sure there are all kinds of different reasons, but I'm willing to bet that if you sat down, analyzed the reasons, analyzed the loans, figured out what could be done between flexible underwriting, perhaps using some public money to write down the interest rate for people who can't carry a loan at the full market interest rate, things like guaranteeing a loan with public money, so forth. I think it is a huge need to expand the resource base. And I think interesting, I don't know if the land bank would be interested or not, but I think the land bank might be a very logical body because they are involved in demolition, construction, property maintenance, and management to actually put something like that together. So it's certainly worth thinking very seriously about. The other thing I'll just mention, if you did have significantly more resources for loans and for home repairs, I suspect, not from Cleveland knowledge, but from my knowledge of talking to people in other cities mostly, and you were trying to get, let's say, 10 times as many loans out on the street as currently are being provided, you would probably run into serious trouble finding enough competent, responsible contractors to do all the work that had to be done. Secondly, those contractors, even your responsible contractors, might have trouble finding enough skilled tradespeople, electricians, plumbers, etc., to do all the work that needed to be done. Because one thing in this country, we've allowed our VOTEC system in the educational system to decline terribly over the last 30 or 40 years as we've been encouraging everybody to go to college. So I think we really need, again, you could say it's another ecosystem. And I think the land bank could play a very constructive role in it. I think it's a bit of a long roundabout answer, but
I have other questions for you, but let me go to one question from our audience. I don't know if you can see these or not. I'll read them out. You mentioned maintaining home ownership to stabilize neighborhoods. Older adults are increasingly faced with home repairs they can't afford and few supports. In addition to property tax increases forcing them out of their homes, how do we prioritize home repair investment? I think you've already pretty much addressed that. Let me go to the second question. Much of the effort in community development is to stabilize housing and increase the value. However, as property increases in value, it becomes less affordable, as well as property taxes go up for long-term owners who cannot afford the higher taxes. Any thoughts where in the midst of a big change in property tax uh, policy here in Ohio. So I don't know if you want to talk about property taxes in general or property taxes for people that are vulnerable to them.
I can talk about them in general, certainly. I don't know the nuts and bolts of what's been going on in Ohio, so I can't talk to that. But I think I do know other places where they have created a variety of, well, tax freezes or tax adjustments or so forth, where property values have gone up. I know Cook County, Illinois has done this, City of Philadelphia has done this. I think there are quite a few others. So but I think it goes to a larger issue of, do we have a support system for older homeowners and older people, whether it's in Cleveland, whether anywhere. And, how many people actually work in, whether it's senior outreach programs or centers or support things in Cleveland? I don't know, but I suspect we don't have a strong support system for older people, because we don't in most parts of the country, which is a huge problem because we're becoming an older and older nation. We almost 20% of Americans are now 65 and over. And it's going to keep going up because the birth rate is declining, and we're going to become an older country. Now, we're way behind Japan and behind China, but we are becoming an older country, and we need to focus on our older people. And one issue is to help them keep their homes in good condition. So not only, again, they will be able to live in them safely and healthily, but that when they die, and this is critically important, one of the most important things people can do to increase or preserve home ownership is to make sure that when houses come on the market in a given neighborhood, that they are in close to move-in condition. Because the typical home buyer goes in, looks at a house, sees a lot of work needs to be done, runs in the opposite direction. An investor comes in, looks at that house and says, I can fix this with duct tape, and buys the house for bottom dollar, and we know the rest. So that's I think, a really important issue.
Okay, let me go back to your comment about getting to know your neighborhood. We've had a lot of literature recently about the isolation of Americans not connecting to people outside their household or their workplace. Cleveland's got a lot of CDCs and block clubs, which do engage people that are interested and active. But do you have thoughts or examples from other places about how best to get people more involved in public issues, including voting? Here in Cleveland, we have a very low voting rate in the city of Cleveland, but beyond voting, helping neighbors, working on issues.
It's really tough. I don't have any great ideas. I mean, there are lots of people all over the country who are trying to figure out answers to this question. I think, and it's difficult because, one of the problems, especially in a very low income neighborhood, is an awful lot of people are basically on overload, just trying to survive. If you're a single mom, you're taking a bus an hour and a half out to the suburbs to work in a Walmart. You barely have enough money to pay the rent and feed your kid. And your life may be kind of going from one crisis to another. It's very hard for you to get engaged and come out to community meetings. I think you have to try. You have to work hard at it and so forth and build the engagement, which means a lot of work, a lot of legwork by the organization is trying to do it, by a CDC or whomever it is. Another thing, you've got to try to organize events and activities that are not just meetings to talk about some sort of abstraction. And you have to provide food. So another thing is to try to create places in the neighborhood which become appealing third places for people. I think we don't have enough. And we need places where people can gather, where people can feel comfortable. Just, it might be a reasonable thing just to open I don't know if you want to call it a coffee house or some kind of a place where people can come, people can hang out, people can spend hours there or just come in, get a cup of coffee, can get food and so forth. And even, it wouldn't necessarily have to break even, but someplace where you could start getting people to engage with each other and encourage neighbor. I know there was an organization in Lawrence, Massachusetts, which is a struggling small industrial city, not that far from Boston, called Lawrence Neighborhood Works, that actually they just did everything constantly to try to bring people together, including one thing you do is try to organize individual block groups, individual people to, again, food is really important. If you tell people on a block, we try like you all to come to a community meeting and talk about the future of the block, you'll get two people. If you say, come to dinner at so-and-so's house, maybe you can even bring something, or you don't have to bring something, but we'll have dinner and we'll sit around and talk. You'll get 10 people. So I think you have to be resourceful. And I think, unfortunately, many organizers just think of the idea is we'll have community meetings and we'll talk about the community and we'll figure out things. And it doesn't just happen that way. So this is a really tough thing because people do lose connection with each other. And when you lose connection with each other, not only does the neighborhood suffer, ultimately you're the worst for it. But it's a tough struggle.
Well, speaking of food, we could talk about the current crisis in food for many people with the federal cutbacks, despite the efforts of the food banks. But let me go to chat and see what we have in chat for you. I don't see any questions there.
I see a comment. I think it's interesting that Ohio City would be focusing on this sort of thing because in a way, Ohio City is a, relatively speaking, more affluent neighborhood than the great majority of Cleveland neighborhoods.
Correct.
And one of the things that's interesting, and this has always struck me, and I wish I could figure out how to replicate it. There are lots of well-to-do neighborhoods and communities in the United States, urban, suburban, and so forth, that do not have any ongoing neighborhood organization per se. But if something happens that people perceive as a threat, that neighborhood becomes organized in a millisecond. And I think a lot of it has to do with mixture of skill sets, energies, financial resources, obviously. But having that latent organizational capacity is incredibly important for a neighborhood. And I think it only happens if there's some kind of an underlying connectivity between people to begin with.
Well, in terms of food, return to that, Cleveland has been notable for encouraging community gardens. We have a couple of the largest and most effective food bank organizations countywide, and a fairly generous population despite our poverty rate in supporting issues like food pantries. But do you think of any other ways to involve people in helping their neighbors? And certainly a lot of them are going to be through churches and nonprofits and food banks trying to basically feed themselves. We're in a pretty upcoming dire situation.
I think there aren't any, unusual or remarkable ideas, but I'll just throw out one thing is maybe, and I don't know how far this has gone already, but is expand taking community gardens to scale and turning community gardens into basically community farming. And maybe doing this not just in the city, but trying to find parcels out, suburban parcels that are close enough to the city to get the stuff back and forth that are a few acres. One of the things that I found is amazing is the amount of vegetables you can grow on just a handful of acres is absolutely mind-boggling. I did an analysis that I wrote up in one of my books where I was looking at this whole question of food self-sufficiency. And I looked at, just by way of an example, Peoria, Illinois. Peoria County has some of the best agricultural soil in the United States, plenty of water, and so forth. And every square inch, virtually, of that land is being used to grow corn and soybeans for export. And everything that people in Peoria eat, which is a city of 130,000 people, is imported from all over the world. And if you took 2% of that land, you could grow all of the vegetables and fruits, and probably raise all the chickens too, for all I know, that the people in Peoria would eat during the course of the year. So one of the things you might want to look at in Cleveland, and this again, look at it from a regional standpoint, not just in the city, is how to increase the local food supply on a larger scale than is done through typical community gardening activities. I mean, I'm not trying to in any way put down community gardening. I think that's great, but typically it does not operate at scale. And I think there are ways to increase food production at scale within the local community, again, defined as a region, that could actually make a significant dent in the need for food supplies in Cleveland.
Let me go to a question, see if we have more questions here. Nope, we don't have any more. Let me ask you about national service. Again, with shrinking resources, including your cutbacks in AmeriCorps, which is very unfortunate, but you see any possibility of, at least in the future, reviving national service requirements so that a lot of those folks, as they have been in the past here in the Cleveland area, work with neighborhood groups, work with nonprofits, assist older homeowners, all kinds of things as a matter of volunteer work, but also under the rubric of national service?
Okay, I don't see a national service requirement on the horizon. I think when we eliminated the draft, I think that was when we basically, as a country, made a decision that we're not going to get into any kind of service requirements going forward. And I don't think that's changed. I'm not sure that was a good idea, but it's done. I think there's certainly the possibility that some future president and some future administration would revive AmeriCorps or something like that. And I think that would be great. I think these are extraordinarily valuable programs, both for the person who's the volunteer and for the community where they're working. And I really hope that it is revived and becomes robust. I think another thing that we could look at is building more service activity into university educations, whether it's, something that you do part-time while you are also studying, or something where maybe a semester or even a year would be devoted to service, and you would maybe do periodic seminars and things like that and get academic credit for it. I think there are lots of ways to build community service into university education. I gotta say, this was not part of an organized program or so forth, but I spent about, maybe 10, 15 hours a week for my junior and senior years working as a field worker for the poverty program, which was a very new program in those days. I would leave the campus, get on my bicycle, and go into these neighborhoods and start knocking on people's doors and stuff. And I don't know how much good I did, but it certainly made an incredible difference in my life.
Likewise, I was a Vista lawyer in Detroit after law school. Let me talk. I don't think we have any other questions at the moment.
Well,
you mentioned
let me
Cleveland.
just add something. Just one comment. I partly take back what I said about Ohio City, and I realize Ohio City is not it's not Pepper Pike. It's not a rich, wealthy community in time. But I suspect that the fact that Ohio City does have a significant educated, stable, etc. population is probably really helping to make that process successful. It's not, so I think that's another argument for having, economically diverse neighborhoods, for having neighborhoods which do have stable homeowners and all that sort of thing.
Let me return to your comment about, or noting that Cleveland has a extraordinary high poverty rate. I think we're still in the, unfortunately, top 5 behind Detroit, but way up there. The mayor of Baltimore was on television this morning talking about child poverty, of which we have an unfortunate great rate among our poverty rate generally. Talking about the city supporting programs to assist children in poverty. And of course, we have Head Start and have had Head Start for a long time, but it's in danger of reduced funding, if not worse. Any thoughts about somehow addressing child poverty, even if we don't have more funding, although Baltimore was, or the state of Maryland is going to spend a fair amount out of its budget to do that?
Well, it's tough. Baltimore is fortunate in a number of levels that they're in a state which has not to mention a governor who cares about Baltimore, a legislature that's concerned about society and people's lives and so forth, and is actually providing a lot of resources to try to help the city of Baltimore in all kinds of different ways. And, not every state has that. It's hard to think of what to say about this because it's such a pervasive problem, and it is so much tied in with the economic conditions of most of the people, of the families with children. And so many of the children who are poor are in single parent families where the parent, usually the mother, not always, but usually the mother, has a very limited and unstable income stream. And that's the crux of the problem. So ironically, if there are ways to, whether through training or through whatever, to improve the economic situation of single parents, to enable them to become more stable, that's probably the most important single thing you can do to alleviate child poverty. And in the meantime, I mean, I think we need to build stronger support systems for those families. We need to take advantage of, in many cases, they do have family support systems, but those systems are easily strained. You know, there's only so much a grandmother can do. But I think the critical issue goes back. So many of these things go back to the basic economic conditions that there are too many people who do not have the ability at present to earn enough to live stable, secure lives. And that is what I think we have to focus on.
Yeah, we do have a comment here related back to Ohio City that the CDC is working to address issues like homelessness and other issues both in or around the neighborhood. So that is a good point. I think it's one of the many good CDCs that Cleveland has, including its a collaboration with another neighborhood and having a land trust beginning to do some housing in Ohio City. So you've been addressing what seem to be insurmountable immediate problems, particularly given federal policy at the moment. But I guess, as you said, in hopes that there's a reverse of those policies in the future, we could at least revive or increase support systems, whether it's for homeless or children in poverty or the elderly unable to continue to effectively live in their houses. Do you have any other general thoughts or any examples of cities you would hold out as models in addressing both, not just housing problems, but just point out housing is more a symptom of many other problems, or leadership that has emerged, mayors in some cities or other communities?
I think I don't think you can point to a city, any city, and say they're doing everything right, or they're even doing most of the things right. But there are a lot of really good examples around the country of specific things that are being done right. And I think the trick is to basically steal other people's ideas. So, as I mentioned, there are a handful of workforce programs that have figured out how to connect the workforce training to the other needs of their populations so that they really become effective. There are, you know, in schools, there are quite a number of schools around the country, and they're usually charter schools, which I know is painful to some people, that have done remarkably well in taking kids from the very low income neighborhoods, very low income families, and so forth, and actually getting them to the point where they have real significant opportunities in their lives. The homeless programs that have focused on housing first have clearly had some impact. Of course, now the administration is trying to dismantle that, which I think is a tragedy because it means more people will be out on the streets, more people will be in encampments or wherever. But the basic thing is that we have to look and find the individual models around each thing rather than finding a city to emulate. Because after all, Cleveland is not the same as Des Moines, Iowa, or Oklahoma City, or Kalamazoo, or Baltimore, or anything. Cleveland has a distinct set of needs, challenges, opportunities, etc. And you don't want to just say, okay, I like what Baltimore is doing, I'll do all of it. I'll do everything just like Baltimore. No, I think you want to look around, find the best models, and then figure out how to tailor them to Cleveland's particular needs, because there really are models out there to emulate. And conceivably, after it's seasoned itself a little more, perhaps Cleveland's residents' first code enforcement program will become a model for other cities to emulate. I certainly hope so. Okay, so have any, there's bits and pieces. And this I'm looking at, are there communities that have grown food to scale that to use as a model for Cleveland?
We just got a question on that very point. Do you have a
I'm looking, yeah,
example?
So I'm not aware of any in the United States, at least. I think some communities are getting closer. Interestingly, one city that's probably getting closer, again, not in terms of the city doing it, but it's in terms of happening, is a small city and unfortunately, for comparison purposes, a very affluent city in upstate New York, Ithaca, which has an amazingly strong food co-op, which, I mean, in a county where of a total population of about 100,000 people, this co-op has 12,000 members. And they try to source locally, but they get, at this point, only about 10% of the food they sell is sourced locally. But on top of that, there's an amazing farmers market structure. First, they have a pavilion, a large pavilion down by the lake, as well as some other buildings for winter use. They have 130 local farmers who participate in this, bring their produce, their meat, and so forth. And currently the county has created a task force on food self-sufficiency to try to see how they can up this current level. So that's one of the best models. Again, it's not necessarily applicable to Cleveland, but if you think about Cleveland and the Cleveland region, this is not a bad agricultural region. There's, despite all the suburban houses that have been built, there's a lot of good quality farmland within a relatively short distance of the city. There's probably a longer growing season in upstate New York. So I think it would be very interesting. Now, clearly, there are lots of complicated economics associated with going towards food self-sufficiency, but it's not crazy. And it would certainly be worth doing some serious analysis, figuring out what could be done, how much could be grown, how it would be used, and so forth. And I think it would be tremendously potentially valuable, both in strengthening the local economy, and most importantly, having sources of food for people who need it.
So, Alan, our time together is about to end. I'm wondering, given your knowledge and given your podcast and your articles, what would you recommend to people if they want to keep up and look for interesting ideas or news about cities, neighborhoods? Any suggestions? Of course, we have your podcast and your writings.
So, obviously, read my stuff. That's easy. But
good idea. Good idea.
I mean, there are a lot of sites. Actually, it's amazing. There's a Bloomberg City something, I forget what it's called. Bloomberg has a regular daily feed with good stuff on cities. Planetizen, clever, has stuff. Shelter Force has a lot of stuff that's very directly relevant to community development practitioners. Next City has a lot of useful information. They come up and they do a lot on sort of highlighting interesting and good practice models. There's a huge amount of information out there. In fact, it's almost overloading how much information there is out there.
Well, thank you very much for joining us from afar. Appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you. Actually, I'm not that far. I'm on East 9th Street.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that. In any event, thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughts with our audience today. I'm going to turn it back to Carrie.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And thank you all for spending your morning with us to learn about these great housing topics affecting our local community. Thank you to all of our speakers this morning, and thank you to my colleagues on the Housing and Community Development Forum Planning Committee for all your work on today's event. On behalf of the Planning Committee, a special thank you to the Akron-Cleveland Association of Realtors and Third Federal for sponsoring the forum series and this conference. Without your support, this event would not have been possible. As a reminder, this event was recorded, so we will be sharing a link once it has been posted on YouTube. However you may celebrate the season, I wish you an enjoyable holiday season and look forward to our continued work together in 2026. Thank you all.